Joe and I were yeah, and I was
Here, yeah.
just 1 minute. Yeah, I just have to send the live stream link back. Sorry, I was told we were starting 5 minutes late, and then 1 minute ago I was told we weren't.
Beatrice, you're already. You're already on live stream, so. Long story.
Good afternoon. I think we'll start. I'm Brendan Donnelly, I'm the Director of the Federal Trust. Very happy to be collaborating with new Europeans on this occasion to hold this very topical and very interesting conference. There will be two panels. You can come here. It seems to be receiving the microphone. Is that any better? I'll try it again.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Well, I'm Brendan Donnelly, I'm the Director of the Federal Trust, and very pleased to be collaborating with new Europeans on this occasion. We've got a full programme, so let's kick off. We're going to have, in the first session, which I'll be chairing, a review of some of the economic and social background to Brexit. Before I ask our very welcome guest, Professor Ballas, to speak, I should just go through the warnings about health and safety. There isn't any fire drill planned for this afternoon, so that means that if there is a fire alarm, it won't be a drill. So you will have to get out through the doors and assemble outside. The facilities, the toilets are through there. And with no more ado, I'll ask Professor Ballas once again, urging him to speak into the microphone to give us 10 minutes or so on what he sees as being the economic background for Europe at the moment.
Thank you very much. I don't know if hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, we can, yes. Thank you for the opportunity to talk here. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a professor of economic geography at the University of Groningen, and but I would like to say, before I present, give you a flavor of the economic and social landscape of Europe using some maps from recent work that I've done with colleagues at the University of Oxford, the University of Iceland now. I'd like to say a few words about a bit of background to that work and about myself. So I am originally from Greece, as you might be able to tell from my name and my accent. but I'd like to joke that I have a Greek Yorkshire accent because I lived in Britain for nearly 20 years in Leeds and Sheffield. I'd always like to joke with my students at the University of Sheffield that I do have a Greek Yorkshire accent. So I feel, I now live in Groningen in the Netherlands. It's spelled Groningen, but it's pronounced Groningen. I don't know. Are there any Dutch people in the room? So hopefully I get the Dutch accent right. It's Groningen. The north, so I moved from the north of Britain to the north of the Netherlands. And I feel very strong European above everything else. I feel I'm a member of New European since 2014. I feel European identity is above any other identity I have. And also, I feel Britain is home. Yorkshire is home. I feel at home here, so I'm particularly frustrated with what's going on, very sad. I came to this country as an Erasmus student from Greece and then came back to do postgraduate studies in the same home for quite a while. So I always feel this is home for me. I always will feel home. Hopefully Brexit will not happen, but if it does, I will fight for Britain to come back. I will be a returner, as they say, the new term for this kind of activism. So I will, within the next 10 minutes, I will give you a flavor of the economic and social landscape of Europe using some maps from an atlas we put together with colleagues at the University of Sheffield at the time, Danny Dorling and Benjamin Henning. Ben Henning is now in Iceland and Danny Dorling is in Oxford. But we were all working in Sheffield at the time for quite some time, and we were very frustrated with what was going on in the build-up to the Brexit. Before the referendum was announced, we felt that we were part of the small but rapidly growing minority of Europeans who feel Europeans very strongly. And we felt, I think this quote by Bono, you might have seen it before, I personally very much relate to that. We feel that Europe is a feeling and it should be more of a feeling. And we felt that as geographers, as social scientists, one of the ways to engage with this debate about Europe, as I said well before David Cameron brought the referendum, we felt that one of the ways to engage with all this is to produce an atlas of Europe, which at its heart considers Europe as one place, one country. And what has been going on in Britain over the last few years, sadly, there are some analogies with what happened in my home country in Greece. I'd like to use for background this photograph from demonstrations back in 2015. I was part of that, feeling that European above everything else, feeling that making the case that Greece is part of Europe, but also that Europe is our homeland. So there is, as I said, a small but rapidly growing minority of Europeans who feel Europe above is their home. It's good to see that in Britain, maybe hopefully not too late, but it's good to see that a very large segment of the enthusiastic minority is in Britain, especially the younger people in this country. And we engage with that. And the inspiration for the maps I'm about to show you is have at its heart the feeling of Europe. Feeling Europe is our country. So we have been working on that for quite some time. We did 2 books. That's the latest book, The Human Atlas of Europe. And I'm going to show you a few maps drawing on the social and economic landscape of Europe. Sorry, I think my voice is loud enough, but hopefully, yes. So the Human Atlas of Europe considers Europe as one country, our country, Europe, and it includes all countries that have expressed a very strong commitment to a common European future. So this work dates back to over 8 years ago. We did the Social Atlas of Europe in 2014, and we have been working on this idea for quite some time. And the map of Europe includes all countries that express a strong interest in a common European future. This includes the United Kingdom. Hopefully, the United Kingdom will still be there in the future. I hope, as I said, even if there is a Brexit, there will be a comeback. So that's, for illustration, the countries of Europe color-coded by their association with Europe, so all European Union member states, but also any other country that is associated with Europe, either as a member state or EEA or candidate country. So before I move on to the economic and social climate, I would like to start with introduce the maps by using physical climate, a topic of the weather, of small talk in this country and also in the Netherlands. The weather, rain, so this is how much rain falls on our country, Europe. So you can see, like, start thinking, I would like to encourage you to think of what we have in common as Europeans, and what are the differences in Europe, including the weather. We can increasingly escape bad weather as well. So this is the map, how much rain falls every year on land. And at the heart of our effort as geographers is to use state-of-the-art visualization to resize countries and regions according to variables of interest. So this is how much rain falls on people's heads. So we resize every area in every square kilometer on approximately according to how many people live there, and then we recolor everything according to variable of interest. So that's climate, rain. So you get a picture of a flavor of our work. We start with that to introduce the idea of the atlas. And I can now move on to economic climate and social climate. So the same technique can be used to map economic climate. So here we have a map of GDP, economic geography, GDP per capita across European regions. So we have all regions, every square kilometer is sized according to population, and then we color it by GDP. So at the heart of the argument behind this book is that we consider that Europeans have much more in common, and a lot of the divides are within member states and even within cities rather than between them. So there's more division within the United Kingdom, and even in a city like London, more divisions within London than between our countries that make up the European Union and the future European Union, as the Atlas illustrates. So this map shows social disparities and economic disparities, GDP. We can also look at unemployment, change in unemployment. A lot of the rise of populism and Brexit is interpreted as the outcome of social and spatial disparities, inequality, massive inequality, increase in inequality that was brutally hit the most disadvantaged parts of Europeans, including Britain, and then Europe has been scapegoated unfairly for a lot of that. So here we see unemployment rate, change in unemployment rate, and you could argue that a lot of these patterns also relate to political geography accordingly. Similarly, we look at disposable income, and again, I'd like you to consider what I said about what we have in common. London has much more in common with the most affluent city regions in Europe, rather than the rest of the UK in many ways. And Yorkshire, for example, has much more in common with some regions in Greece than compared to London. So again, at the heart of the argument in this book, in this work, is that, and our ongoing work, is that Europeans have much more in common between countries, and we need to engage with that, and also engage with recent work, for example, by Andres Rodriguez Poser at the London School of Economics, who discusses, puts forward the idea of the places that don't matter. A lot of the argument, there is the argument that Brexit and the rise of populism in Europe is associated with territorial cohesion and the feeling that some places don't matter. So we paint a picture of all that. We highlight social and spatial disparities. I do show you some flavor here. The purpose of this talk is to introduce, provide some background to this very exciting event. And I will be around all day, so I will be very happy to discuss any questions you may have informally, as well as towards at the end, in a few minutes when I finish this talk. Also, another map, very relevant: poverty. London, the most affluent region in Europe, but also a region with the highest poverty rate. Again, all this is extremely relevant in terms of social and economic landscape and how it fits in with political geography. And a map that relates probably to the remainder of the event. That I don't like the term foreign. I feel European. I don't feel I'm foreign in any part of Europe. Europe is my home. But it's helpful to see a map of how many people do not have the citizenship of the region, the country in which they reside. So here's another map using the same technique. Rain. We moved from rain to economy, social geography, and now something that brings more things together. And I'd like to conclude by highlighting again that our continent is much more united. The Europeans have much more in common than the populist media and populist discourses suggest. We have a lot of common values. We have a lot of things to be passionate about. A lot of things for Europeans to have feel about Europe, like Bono said, not just in terms of bonds of interest, economic interest. I think a big mistake with the campaign for Remain was that it stressed the economic interest. We are stronger in, as if it's only economic interest. I feel really passionate to be in Britain. This is my home. I feel a lot of British people also feel passionate about Europe, and I think the feeling should have been stressed more. I disagree with Bono. I think there is feeling already, and I'm very frustrated, but at the same time happy to see young people here frustrated with what's happening with Brexit, but also optimistic with the younger generation being so passionate. There are so many European flags outside the House of Commons. I've never seen this before. I've been here for 20 years. I feel Britain will stay or come back. So I'd like to conclude with these lines about what we have in common, and I'm very happy to answer any questions. And I'd like to thank you also for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, one or two brief questions before we get on to the next panel.
Thank you.
Yourself, if you will, briefly.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, is that? Thank you. Can you hear me?
No.
Suzanne, is that work?
Yeah.
No? Yes. Can you hear? Thank you very much. My name is Michael Wells. I am a translator. But I have a very, very quick question about your presentation. It was fascinating and love maps. Did you map the linguistic diversity of Europe? Because I think one of the big problems with Brexit is that the native, in very big inverted commas, population in the United Kingdom, who are predominantly monolingual, have no view of the way that multilingual other Europeans and other places look at what Europe means, and then so that's from a linguistic point of view, we're at a huge disadvantage. So I wondered if you
That's a very interesting question. Any other questions? We'll take them together.
Andy Pye from London for Europe. I was very interested in your initial comment about how you felt part of Europe as a Greek, somebody of Greek origin, and it occurred to me perhaps you had more reason to feel anti-European given some of the economic issues that you've had in the past than perhaps we do in the UK. Walking from Westminster to here today, you could come across two groups of people in the UK. You mentioned the Europeans, pro-Europeans, and perhaps we've taken it all for granted and we're only now beginning to be passionate about it. But before you reach that, you would come across the Leave Means Leave people who have an absolute hostility towards Europe. And how are we actually going to square that circle?
One more question over there from Richard. Just to bring you the microphone.
Perhaps this should be for afterwards. It's a technical one. Spain appeared in your maps to be full of employment and without interpretation, but perhaps I read the colours wrong.
Can you answer those questions? And if there's anything particularly relating to the United Kingdom that you want to stress about your maps, inevitably you went through them quite quickly. There might be some further points about the United Kingdom specifically that you want to stress.
Okay, with regards to the first question, we did consider this. Unfortunately, the data is not so good. So one of the limitations that we had to use to work with data that are available in all regions. So there are data on linguistic variables in some member states within regions, but not everywhere. So we didn't consider it, but it's not there. Proxies like born abroad or foreign citizens. But this is an ongoing project, so hopefully we will engage with this as well. With regards to the second question, I would say, as Greece, before the economic crisis, was one of the most pro-European countries according to the Eurobarometer. I think there has been a lot of unfair scapegoating and criticism of Europe with regards to what happened in Greece over the last 10 years. Greece is a very affluent country, still a very affluent country. The politicians in Greece did do, to some extent, what happened in this country, so it's a bit of a deja vu for me. They did blame Europe for a lot of things. I mean, there have been things that they could have been done differently, but Greece is a very affluent country. There's no reason why we should have all this poverty in Greece, and also the refugee crisis. There are many things that Greece can do, even within the austerity context. So I don't think this is a reason to blame Europe, and also and that leads to the following question as well. One of the ideas of the European Union is social and territorial cohesion. So when things go wrong, we can hold European politicians to account. Territorial cohesion is part of that. So Greece is part of a union that promotes territorial cohesion. The European project is for that. So I think it is doing its bit. Greek politicians did not handle it very well. I think with regards to Britain, there are lots of inequalities. I did highlight the GDP per capita, and maybe I think I have poverty. Yeah, poverty is the best example. There is a lot of poverty in Spain as well, just on the outskirts. London is it has a very high, shockingly high poverty rate, and it's visible for me. I mean, that was one of my first cultural shocks in Britain, coming here in the 90s, seeing homeless people. I've never seen homeless people before. So that's an ongoing, but it's getting massively worse. And again, territorial cohesion is part of the European agenda. So the people who vote for Brexit, they come predominantly from perhaps places that don't matter. There has been
don't matter.
they feel they don't matter. Yeah, sorry. The places that they feel they don't matter. I'm using a jargon, the terms introduced by economic geographers recently. So the place they feel they don't matter. This also applies to Donald Trump. People from places that they feel do not matter anymore as a place identity. I'm not saying that they don't matter, but they feel that they don't matter. And there is a misunderstanding there because Europe is on their side. Europe, territorial cohesion is about helping places that fall behind. It's about territorial cohesion. It's about telling people who are in a deprived region that they can stay put and we will help them. It's not about telling them to move to London, to move to a more affluent region. It's about helping the territory where people reside. So this is one of the things that went wrong in the referendum campaigns. There has been no stress enough of what Europe is about. With regards to maps that pertain to patterns that relate to Britain, I think inequality and poverty and the massive inequality within Britain and how this relates to what northern Britons have in common with other parts of Europe, I think that's what I would say is the main message of these maps.
Meetings will be around the rest of the afternoon. If there are questions to come up later, we can put them. But I think now we ought to make some progress. And thank you, again, very much. Thank you. They sometimes say you can always tell the auction of it, you can't tell it much. He just proved that slur on Northern Britain. Would people like to come up for the next panel, please, or if you sit wherever you like. Yeah. And there's Leonard. Would you like to come here too? Yeah. Fine, then. Well, after a very interesting introduction from Dimitris, we are now moving on to a more sectional view of individual aspects of the social and economic implications of Brexit and for the European context. And our first speaker is Dr. Heather Roth from the National Institute for Economic and Social Research. That's 10 minutes from each of you, and we'll have half an hour for questions and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that I'm also from Yorkshire. I was born in Bradford, but I only lived there until I was 1.5. I think it still counts. So, yeah. So I'm going to talk about, can you hear me okay? I'm going to talk about what has been the impact of the Leave vote so far in terms of strain on skills and labour, and then where will the skills gaps of the future be, and how will they be filled? And I'll be making particular reference to the immigration white paper, which was out in November. It gives us some steer, some idea of what policies are going to be.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking first at what the impact of the Leave votes has been on migration so far. Well, first of all, there's been a fall in net migration since June 2006, around 60%. So it's at its lowest level since 2012, and it's accounted for by reducing migration from the EU. So EU net migration to the year to June 2018 was 107,000. Non-EU was 173,000. So there's been a bit of a switch there. So compare that to net migration from the EU of 189 in June 2016. So 189 to 107 is quite some fall in a period of 2 years. So there's been a fall in migration across the EU, but the largest falls have been among EU8 nationals, so countries that joined the EU in 2004, and migration from Poland has taken a particular fall. So that 23,000 came in the year to June 2018, but at the same time 23,000 left. So that's a real change in the statistics, and that's down from 88,000 in 2007. So quite a big fall there, and similarly Spain has had big falls in migration because they used to be one of the main sending countries to the UK. So the main driver of falling net migration from the EU is a decline in EU nationals, whose main reason for coming to the UK is to work. But what do we know about the impact on particular sectors? So it's quite early days and it's quite difficult to tell. I have a specific example. We've been doing research on the NHS, and our research found that in the first year after the referendum, joiners to the NHS dropped by more than 12%, and leavers increased by 18%. And this change is particularly pronounced for nurses, where joiners from the EU fell by more than 30%, and leavers increased by 25%. So you've got a pattern emerging there. And all researchers found that Brexit has been the key driver of that. Of course, other factors account as well. There's quite a high turnover in the NHS anyway. And our research predicted that by the end of the transition period, the NHS in England could be short of between 5,000 and 10,000 nurses in addition to current vacancies. So other evidence is a bit more piecemeal in other sectors, but it's fairly consistent. So employers in lower skilled sectors, including social care, are finding it hard to recruit, as well as others in sectors such as hospitality, food and drink processing. And employers in those sectors believe that it's due to 3 factors: a fall in the value of sterling, recovery of home economies, and uncertainty about the future in the UK, including the hostile environment. So what are employers doing? So in the case of skills migration, they're recruiting more from outside the EU, so pressure has been put on the UK's visa system because employers have obviously not been able to recruit as many from the EU. And in the case of the health service, that's led to the government having to remove the cap, to remove doctors and nurses from the cap on skilled migration from outside the EU. Otherwise, employers have been trying to recruit alternatives, including British workers, but that's not new. And so they've been doing that for some time. So contrary to what is often thought, employers don't have a preference to recruit migrants or EU migrants in particular. And research consistently finds that employers rely on migrants because they can't recruit enough British workers. So currently unemployment is around 4%, and it has been for some while. And the employment rate is almost 76%, and that's the highest participation rate in employment since records began way back in 1971. And a survey that we did with the Chartered Institute for Personal Development found that 25% of employers said the main reason for recruiting migrants was shortages of labour, and that rose to 35% in sectors, in low skilled sectors. And very few employers say they're motivated by migrants' lower expectations in relation to pay and conditions, and yet that's an argument that's often put forward, including by the government. So there are indications that employers are looking a bit more widely to recruit underrepresented groups, anticipating further falls in the supply of migrants. So they're working more closely with job centres, and some have talked about targeting particular groups like women returners, people with disabilities and so on. But employers don't see those sources of filling what could potentially be quite a big gap in labour and skills. Immigration has always played a role in meeting skill and labour shortages, and new immigration policy is now being developed to replace free movement, and the white paper, as I said, was published in November. So what does it propose? Well, its proposal centres on two principles which appear very strongly in political and public debates about immigration: control and skills. So control over immigration to replace free movement of work, in what the paper calls a single skills-based system, which will have no preference for EU citizens, and which would effectively end low-skilled migration. That's the overall aim of the immigration white paper. So in relation to skills, it includes provision only for highly skilled migrants, and these are defined in a slightly different way to they currently are, reducing the qualification requirements from degree level to roughly A level, NVQ level 3, but importantly with a salary threshold. So the Migration Advisory Committee, which advises the government on new policy, recommended a figure of £30,000, and that would effectively exclude many as well as lower skilled jobs, which is intended to but it would include jobs like teachers, construction workers, paramedics, all of those which are kind of fairly essential for our economy. The level isn't firmly set, it will go to consultation, but it would have to go down some way to cover jobs where shortages are currently experienced and where employers rely on migrants, including social care staff, hotel staff, and so on. And so the white paper specifically makes no provision for lower skilled migration. Its only provision is for a seasonal agricultural workers scheme, which is essentially reviving the scheme that was finished a few years ago, which will be trialled, and a youth mobility scheme, which currently operates in various countries, but which would be extended to low risk countries, which would include the EU. The only real provision it makes for lower skilled work is a transition arrangement with 12-month visas, which will be subject to restrictions on nationalities, duration, and possibly numbers, and again, available to low-risk countries with whom the UK negotiates an agreement. And importantly, visa holders will have no residency rights for dependents, access to services. So effectively, this will be a kind of guesswork scheme that we'll be introducing here. So clearly it's going to be a problem for employers. I don't really need to kind of spell out why, but employers clearly want to be able to recruit and retain people beyond the period of 12 months. I think the proposals will be particularly problematic where employers want people who develop relationships with clients, such as in social care work, and also who can promote to supervisory and management positions, such as in the food sector and manufacturing. But actually, these visas are very likely to be unattractive to migrants themselves, and I think partly for that reason we are heading for quite a big decrease in migration to the UK. So why these proposals? Well, they're explicitly in the white paper as making a nod to public opinion, and there's a quote. I'm going to give you a quote from the white paper that says the MAC, that's the Migration Advisory Committee, has said there should be no dedicated route for unskilled labour, and we do not intend to open one. This is consistent with the public's view that we should be attracting the brightest and best to come to the UK, and that lower skilled labour may have depressed wages or stifled innovation to our economy, which is not what the Migration Advisory Committee found. But in any case, that's the rationale for having restricting migration to highly skilled and not including any provision for lower skilled. I'm going to say briefly to end with about, is that actually what the public think? So if you survey people about their preferences, they will say they support highly skilled migration, and some even support an increase in highly skilled migration. And in contrast, and they show much less support for low skilled migration. But, and skills quite a slippery concept, you can't always be sure that people mean the same thing when they talk about it. And when you do, so we've done focus groups with the public, Lee and Renee Moses, and when you ask people about what migrants they prefer and those that they want to control, they do talk about quality. And a high quality migrant isn't necessarily a highly skilled migrant, but it's someone who comes to work, is a net contributor to public funds, and someone who, importantly, doesn't commit crimes and who doesn't come here to claim benefits. And our research also has found that people readily acknowledge that low-skilled migrants have an important role meeting labour shortages in sectors such as social care, but also less worthy jobs, in areas like construction, agriculture, and performing jobs that are considered to be unattractive by British people. So I think we shouldn't assume that the proposals will address public concerns about immigration, and at the same time, the proposal is very likely to lead to the kind of migration that the public doesn't like, and that's increased churn in communities, people who don't stay very long. I think it'd be much more visible that there's a separate group of people who are coming in and not integrating, and I think actually the public will not like that. So just to conclude, the white paper is a series of proposals that take time to become policy, and there's going to be a consultation with employers, but importantly, there's going to be no amount of consultation with the public, and I think that is a big mistake. In fact, there is some plan. In fact, it's not till 2025, so by which time these proposals will be in operations around 5 years. So my conclusion is that in addition to employer consultation on all of this, there needs to be public consultation on the immigration policy, which should take the form of an informed debate, some kind of citizens' assembly. I know there's various problems with that kind of forum, but I think actually we do need to understand what the public actually want. Also think, and I'll be interested to know what other people on the panel think about, particularly Tim, I think there'd be benefits in more of a dialogue between employers and the public about immigration, where they can discuss and agree about some of the trade-offs around immigration. So yeah, so I think if we don't have that kind of discussion, then we're in danger of ending up with a kind of immigration policy that nobody wants and it's going to damage the economies.
Thanks very much. We'll give a round of applause afterwards, I think, for all our panelists and for everyone. But thank you very much indeed. Obviously, we're hoping to have a nice class of immigrant. That greatly reassures me. Can we have Sue now?
A little clicker.
That can work? Yes, good. Yeah. Thank you.
They are working. So thank you. Just to continue the Yorkshire theme, I'm also a Yorkshire.
Can't hear.
Oh, yeah. You have to be quite near.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
No. Very near to the microphone.
All right, swallow the microphone. Can you hear me now? No. I really can't get much closer.
Okay.
Shall I try this one? It's this one.
This one. That's not on.
Yeah, I think you need a green light.
Right, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I was just saying, continuing the Yorkshire theme, I'm also a Yorkshire lass, originally from Sheffield. What I'm going to do is just give a perspective from my union, Prospect. Prospect is a politically independent union. We represent very diverse group of members across public and private sectors of the economy, but largely they are professionals and specialists, and I think that is relevant in this context. And what we've been doing since before the referendum in 2016 is doing regular membership surveys to make sure that what we're saying as a union is in touch with what our members are telling us. So I have a new survey, sort of hot off the press, which we conducted during 2 weeks in January of all our working members, almost 7,000 responses to the survey, including over 600 from EU citizens who have already been outside.
Can you be nearer? Sorry.
I just told you, yes.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
So I'm not claiming that this is a scientific survey. I'm claiming it is a reasonable barometer of opinion of our members, which I think is useful to inform this debate. So, a few of the questions we asked. If approved by MPs, do you think the proposed Brexit deal will impact your work? Now, you may not be able to see the full detail of this survey, but on the left-hand side, you have a chart with 4 bars. The largest bar is people saying, yes, it will impact my work in a negative way. 47% of people who answered our survey said that. Certain sectors, that's much higher. So broadcasting and entertainment, 58%. In heritage and archaeology, 63%. In science and research, 64%. So a fair proportion. And the more detailed graph at the side of it shows in the yellow columns the responses from EU citizens from outside of the UK. And as I go through these 3 or 4 charts, you will see that in every respect, the level of concern is higher amongst that group of people. And when asked why that was, what our members were saying were mentioning the things like ease of access to raw materials, resources for research, assurance of alignment with the larger EU market, and the wider talent pool across the EU 27 member states. We then asked, do you think Brexit will affect your own personal job security? And again, 51%, the largest bar, blue bar, said that they thought that Brexit will make their own job less secure. In museums and heritage, 2/3, similarly in science and research. So a fair level of concern there certainly amongst our members, who are not low-skilled members, by the way. And then asked what impact people expect Brexit to have on their industry. 68% expect Brexit to have a negative impact on their industry. That's 90% of EU citizens from outside the UK, so I think very clear message there. In terms of social impact, we asked, has Brexit made EU citizens from outside the UK feel less welcome where you live? And a strong level of agreement across industries and sectors that is the case since the referendum. So 71% of our respondents overall said that was the case where they live. Not surprisingly, 85% for EU citizens felt that. Obviously, some of them have been directly at the wrong end of such feeling. And in our key areas, in heritage, archaeology, science, over 80% of people believe that to be the case. We asked very similar question back in October 2017, at which point 80% of EU citizens said that they'd been made to feel less welcome. So that has gone up by 5% over the last 15, 16 months. And then we just asked the EU citizens, people from the other EU member states, whether they've considered leaving the UK as a result of Brexit. And you see from the blue portion of the pie there that 66% of them are considering leaving. Now, again, this is a question we've asked at various time points. When we first asked it at the beginning of 2017, it was 1 in 5. When we asked in October that year, 2017, it was 70%. So currently slightly below 70%, but actually I think in some ways even more worrying, because this is now a hardcore of people. This is people who have heard what the government has to say and are, when you read the comments that came out, they're actively planning, thinking about when they're going to leave the UK. And of course, this is not just an economic decision, it's an emotional decision, and the toll on people's lives, as one of our members said, Brexit is life-changing, it's bad, I feel threatened. So, it's economic and it's social. So why does that matter, and what does it mean? Sorry. There's some heavy-handed clicking here. And why does that worry us? Well, science is one of our big areas. 130,000 EEA nationals from outside of the UK working in UK science, approaching 10% of our science workforce. We already have academics warning of challenges in recruiting postgrads from the EU 27, which will obviously have an impact on research capacity. We know that specialist capacity in some areas is already very low, as has already been said. Employers are recruiting from where they need to recruit to get the skills. There's not a preferential recruitment process. So they're appointing currently the best people for the job, and there isn't a pool of UK talent waiting to step in. And of course, collaboration is really important in science for large-scale projects and collaboration. So we have members working on Antarctic research at the European Space Agency, at Culham in Oxfordshire, and those projects absolutely depend on international collaboration. So what kind of skills, like we were talking about, they're not all high-end academic skills. Neither is it all about low skills. It's not just about NHS, social care, agricultural labourers. From amongst our membership, a lot of people who work in entertainment, for example, high-end computer graphics for film and TV, that industry is booming in the UK at the moment, and it's doing so on the basis of people moving here, often for relatively short periods of time, but depending on free movement, being able to come and go as they get those contracts to work. And absurdly high percentage of vets working in public service in the UK come from Spain. They come from Spain because there is a shortage in the UK, and certainly a shortage at the rates of pay that government is prepared to offer. Those people, by the way, are now, a lot of them, on their way back. Archaeologists, why does that matter? Well, it matters because you need archaeologists to do the surveys that release land for infrastructure projects, including house building, and plant and animal health inspectors. Now, if we move to a system where we do not have free movement across borders, we will depend on skilled inspectors at the port side, if there is room, in the lorry parks where there isn't, and goodness knows where else, doing those inspections for health and safety, for biosecurity, and so on. So those are a flavour of the kind of skills that we might lose from within our union. Absolutely agree in relation to the immigration white paper. It wrongly conflates skills with salary. Goodness knows how you then bring qualifications into that equation, or indeed experience. The talk about recruiting the brightest and the best, of course, is very misleading. So, for example, if you think about scientific teams, you get a big star-name scientific researcher come, wants to bring their team with them. Well, their lab technicians, some of their perhaps IT team, they won't earn the salary threshold required to meet that test in the immigration white paper. And from our own data, we know that over 20% of our membership who work in STEM earn less than 30,000 a year, and often postdocs are appointed on salaries considerably less than that, 25,000 a year. And archaeology, in case you didn't know it, is endemically a low-paying sector. So none of those people would qualify under the term immigration white paper. Just looking at the impact on the civil service, there's been a lot of debate about civil servants. This chart, again, I appreciate you won't be able to see the details, but it's looking at grades roughly earning below about 30,000. And what it shows is that it would mean losing from civil service hundreds of specialists in digital project delivery, science and engineering, all obviously key skills that a civil service needs at the moment. Will the immigration proposals lead to an upward movement in salary? This chart is a chart from the OECD, and what it shows is the change in labour share as a percentage of GDP. In other words, for a range of different countries, what percentage of their GDP does wages account for? And you can see that it's all in the negative. So since 1974, across Spain, Italy, the United States, Japan, Germany, France and the United Kingdom, right at the end, the share of wages in GDP has been declining, and the United Kingdom is that bar right at the end. So that's a long-term trend, which actually is correlated with reduction in trade union coverage. So think about that, and think about the forecasts, the predictions we have about the economic consequences of the no-deal Brexit, the government's own forecast looking over the longer term, over the next 10. That's not accounting for the short-term disruption in terms of border delays, tariffs and so on, or indeed the costs that are already being incurred by the economy due to the prolonged uncertainty. And the recent FT average from forecast suggests that by the end of the first quarter of this year, the economy was 1.2% smaller than it would have been without the Brexit vote. So you don't have to look at that. Look at those long-term trends, look at the economic background to know that Brexit is not going to bring a wages dividend. So in terms of fallout, or where do we go next? I was very interested that Carolyn Fairbairn earlier this week was quoted as saying that the government's approach almost amounted to negligence. There's been a lot of talk about actually what do trade unions want. Well, yes, we do want employment rights to stay in lockstep with improvements across the rest of the EU. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any proposal on the table that will guarantee that at the moment. But that has to be in the context of a healthy economy. It's not just about employment rights, it's about an economy that can create jobs and create good jobs as well. In terms of the government's Prime Minister's assurance about regulation, absolutely we do need good standards of regulation, but regulation is nothing without having the people there to enforce those standards, so that matters too. And I think our conclusion, both economically and socially, is that wherever we go next, it's going to take at least a generation to repair the damage.
Lots there to think about, and I'm sure you'll have some questions and comments.
We'll have questions and comments afterwards. Next, Tim Thomas from the Director of Employment and Skills at the EEF. Once again, if you can speak as far as possible into the microphone, that will help the audience.
Is that all right? Is that close enough?
Yes, that's right.
I'll keep it close. Right, I'll try and give the employer perspective and give 10 minutes. I don't think I'm going to be very positive, but I'll try and cover off some of the ones that were already named. So, EEF, we represent the manufacturing sector in the UK, members throughout the breadth and depth of the whole country. Large organisation, got 12 regional offices, 450 members of staff. Also, our members don't know what they're preparing for, which is the basic problem at the moment, because they don't know what will face them after the 21st of March. That's the background to our sector. In terms of skills, which I'm here to speak about, the skills background is that we're short of people in our sector anyway, which is why our members recruit and train EU nationals. We're short of skills across the piece, so I've just brought some examples. We're short of line management skills, leadership skills, craft technician skills, which Heather spoke about earlier on, IT skills, software skills, design skills. And if we're to take advantage of new technology for the industrial revolution, then we're going to need more people with greater breadth skills than we have at the moment. Currently in our sector, 29% of the vacancies are classified as hard to fill. So the government has a metric for immigration purposes. It's got something called a shortage occupation list. If you're on the list, you get some small benefit from navigating the immigration system. Half the occupations on the soft list are in manufacturing. Our research shows that 3/4 of our members are struggling to recruit. 2/3 say that applicants lack the right technical skills. 6 in 10 say they actually lack the right experience to begin with. And it's not just the quality, it's the quantity. So we need 124,000 people, new people coming to our sector every year, and currently we get about half that. So every year we get about half the people that we need coming into manufacturing and engineering. And that's before we get on to the Brexit. We've got about 330,000 or so EU workers in our sector, and we have 330,000 EU workers because we don't have the UK workers to fill the demand that we have. So what are we doing about it? Because government usually says to us, well, that's all very well, but aren't you just recruiting EU workers, and why don't you train UK workers to fill those particular gaps? And the answer is, we are. So 70% of our members have apprenticeship programmes. EEF, as an organisation, has put £8 million in the last couple of years into 2 training centres, where we take on about 350 apprentices a year, and we can take on more, we say to government, and we can train more UK workers. So why aren't we training more UK workers? That's very simple, because they don't have the basic entry-level qualifications to train. So we could take on more people at our apprentice training centre. We reject around about 50% of the applicants routinely every year because they don't have GCSE English and Maths. In fact, people coming out of school, around half of them don't have GCSE English and Maths, which is a bit of a tricky problem if you then want to train them. I do notice we're fairly close to DFE this centre today, and we do tell the DFE that actually we need more people with those basic skills coming out of school. We need more technical skills. Government's got something called T levels, which we won't see in our sector until at least 2022. So actually, we're not going to fill the gap that Heather spoke about, because in our sector, we've seen lots of EU nationals just stop coming to the UK and some leave. In fact, work seekers, EU workers coming to the UK to look for work in our sector, have broadly fallen off a cliff. We don't have any work seekers that our members tell us about going from the EU. If you're recruiting an EU worker, then they already live and work in the UK and are already in a job and are already in the labour market. But we're getting no new workers coming to the UK at all. We are trying to tackle the skill shortage, so we're doing better engaging with schools. We've got apprenticeships, we've got all-age apprenticeships, and we've got lifelong learning, and we're upskilling and retraining all that we can. But the basic issue is the one that Heather has spoken about, which is a fundamental lack of people in the labour market, because effectively we're at full employment. So how is Brexit complicating this already difficult picture? Because we need more skills, but where are we going to get them from? Well, we're clearly not going to get them from outside the UK if the government implements the white paper proposals that Heather spoke about. We have done some of our own research, and we've shared that with government today, actually. And our research looks at technical level skills in our sector, so sort of the level 3-4 skills that Heather spoke about. And we looked at how many people at that technical level in the UK earn £30,000, which is the government's metric. 88% of people in our sector at that T level, technical level, do not earn £30,000. But there is a bit of a regional variation, as you would expect. If you come down to London and the South East, around about 31% of people do earn £30,000 at the technical level. If you go to the North East, 0% earn £30,000 at the technical level. And that's our own pay data, because EEF is meant one thing we do is collect lots of pay data from our members, and we've been doing that for about the last 10 years or so. So we know exactly what these skill levels pay in different parts of the country. So what you have, and the government's proposal, is a huge regional divide, where if you're in the South East, then potentially, as long as it's at least level 3, you'll be able to pay £30,000 to recruit a non-UK worker, and you're in the East or West Midlands, or the North West, or the North East, or East Wales, you won't. And that would be the impact of that salary level. I noticed Heather said that government was consulting with employers. The consultation is a two-way process. So I think they're on receive but not listen. So we have a very copious response to government's white paper, which sets out exactly what the impact of loss of EU workers will mean. And the £30,000 salary threshold let us hope that government actually listens to the private sector, because I think they'll be listening to the public sector because they want to recruit nurses for the NHS. So that will be the issue. In terms of dialogue between employees and the public, we've been very clear, and we've said since the referendum that this isn't just about employers, it's actually we employ people. We employ 2.7 million people in the UK in our sector, and it's about their jobs, communities and livelihoods. And what Brexit means for those people Because if we leave without a deal, our chief executive has called that variously catastrophic and nonsense, depending on what day he's being interviewed, and it will have a severe effect on UK manufacturing and the public in general. Because, as for example, a large amount of parts that are on power stations come from the EU. Our members provide hospital equipment, a large amount of that comes from the EU, and a large amount of the people that actually keep the critical national infrastructure going come from the EU. And I've got a couple of minutes left, I think, but let me share with you two. Okay, I'll keep going. Let me share with you some of the irritating information that's currently leaking out, not from the UK government, because it's providing no information at all. But as for example, we have two members that between them have 124,000 short-term UK to EU transfers, short-term business trips, which the UK government has for many years not accurately tracked at all. So the question is, I'm in the UK, I'm trying to advise one of my members, they've got lots of UK workers that need to go to the EU for short-term business trips, for whatever they're doing, sales, service, installation, or works with customers, for example. And the question is, can they do that after 29th of March? That's the exam question. Now, the exam answer is, I don't know, unfortunately. But what I did get as I was sitting down there in Manchester is an email from our extremely helpful, supportive, and useful French Association. And the exam question I sent them at 9 o'clock this morning, they've already responded, is this. When I go to Paris at the moment to work for EEF, as long as I've got the correct tax form, EEF does not need to pay the National Insurance Social Security contribution for the day in Paris. If we did need to pay the Social Security contribution for the day in Paris, then it wouldn't be going, because I don't have the French National Insurance number. Now, if we want to do that for every member state that we need to go to as UK nationals, then we're just not going, quite frankly, at all. And my French colleague has happily sent me an email, quite a long and detailed one, because they're very efficient in this, saying, that's interesting, question, let me check. And the answer from Paris is nil one, which probably means that your UK tax form will not be accepted after the 30th of March. So if you're in Paris and you're working, even for a day after the 30th of March, make sure that you're in a position to pay the local French Social Security payment, Mr. EEF. Now, I don't have a French National Insurance number. We've got two colleagues on our Brussels office, and they don't have Belgian Social Security numbers. So I suspect, Brendan, we're just not going unless the government sorts this out rapidly.
Thank you very much indeed. Final contribution to the panel is from Lennart Onoflo, the Brexit columnist in the Dutch magazine The Ondernemer. I'd be interested to know what section of the newspaper your reports appear. Politics, economics, cartoons, sport, and medical. Perhaps you can tell us.
Should I take that one? Yeah, so it's a magazine focused on businesses, so that narrows it down, unfortunately. But I need to restrain myself to talk too much about politics because that's very tempting. Yeah, so my name is Lennart Onoflo, from Yorkshire. I'm from The Hague. So born in The Hague, studied in Amsterdam. I've been here since 2006. I consider myself to be a European first and London the second. I'm also the acting chair of the London chapter of the New Europeans. It's missing there. And as for a few weeks, I run a consultancy with a Brit who's done the exact opposite, a Brit who lives in the Netherlands, and we try to help British and Dutch companies make sense of Brexit and try to sort of navigate the chaos. Because the chaos, it's not going to end on the 29th, it's going to go on for at least a decade. As Brendan said, I write a weekly column about Brexit, mostly focusing on the impact of Brexit on businesses and some of the more peculiar elements that make for good reading. What I want to do here is talk a bit about the impact of Brexit on business, but again, the things that are slightly less, that you may not have heard of. If you read the papers, you read about the impact, but the few stories are a bit more interesting. And then, this may sound like a 10-minute moment, but I promise I will end on a positive. because there is one. I think the key thing to understand is that the impact of Brexit on businesses is very unevenly spread. So some sectors are probably hardly impacted, some are severely impacted, but that's not the only axis. So, for instance, an argument I keep making is that financial services are hit really hard, but they've had the relative benefit of knowing that for almost 2 years. So most banks knew 2 years ago they were going to lose passporting. So that's why they've had 2 years to move operations, part of their operations to other countries. If you're an importer or export, you still don't really know what's going to happen in 6 weeks' time. Particularly affected is the agricultural and food sector, because they not only have to ship actual goods, they also have a whole bunch of legislation on food standards, on health and safety, where again we don't really know what's going to happen there. Especially, I think one of the hardest hit industries in the UK will be farming. I think if you're a Welsh lamb farmer or sheep, that's going to be disastrous, because a lot of your product used to go to other EU countries and it can't anymore, quite likely, or with significant tariffs. I know there's been a lot of talk that a lot of farmers voted in favour of leave. I know the National Farmers Union is not convinced that that's really the case, and there seems to be a level of regret, I think it's called, among some farmers who have voted to leave. So I'm speaking to the NFU in a few weeks to look at what we can do to limit some of the impact. And I think one of the key problems for them is that a lot of them are dependent on EU subsidies, which the UK government has said they will make up for, but that's not really going to happen, because the UK is not going to be able to afford those level of subsidies in probably an economic downturn fairly soon, and tightening the belt anyway. And then even if you're a business that doesn't export, if you're a local business and you have local, your customers are local, still you can have a lot of issues with staffing, as we've already heard. Staffing has always been a big problem, and that will get a bigger problem. So, for instance, something I never really thought about, I interviewed for my column, I interviewed a pub owner in London, and he said he used to rely for the front of house, so people who do serving, people who sat behind the bar, he used to rely on people from Southern Europe, usually students who do a master's degree in the UK, done a bachelor's in Spain, for instance, do a master's degree in the UK, prop up their English a bit, and they come from a country with hospitality culture, so they're very happy to work in service. No, good at it as well. And he says most of those people now go to Dublin because they don't feel welcome here, and you can still learn English. He said, and as we've already heard, in the kitchen, it used to be a lot of Eastern Europeans who would work 7, 8 days a week, who basically work really, really hard because they are saving to buy a hotel back in Poland, for instance. Now, with the drop of the crash in sterling, suddenly these people take home 15% less. So why would you then work in a very expensive city like London or anywhere in the UK if you can also work in Germany or again in Ireland? And then I think one of the big problems we see, the big disparities we see is it's doable. It's easier for a very large company to set aside a few people to start, set aside a few million, and to go through scenario planning. So what happens if this happens? What will we do if that happens? What happens if we lose all these suppliers, or if we get a 10% increase on the cost of raw materials? If you're a massive company, it's wise to do that. You can afford that. If you're a company with 10 people, you can't afford to have 2 people do nothing but scenario planning. And that's why you see that, especially smaller businesses are very rarely prepared because they just can't afford to do so. And that's a big disparity. I think that's also why you will see that smaller businesses are going to be hit a lot harder than larger businesses. Then one of my areas of expertise is actually tech startups, who have a few very specific challenges. Most of them are fortunately are in a fortunate position that they don't ship physical goods, so they don't have issues with customs. They don't have packages stuck in Dover, but they will have staffing issues again, especially in the tech sector. A lot of the staff is imported or immigrants, and if you're a Spanish developer, why would you still go to London and go to Berlin? And you can tell in the startup scene right now that that is a big problem. Then they have potential issues with funding. So a lot of venture capitalists are based in London, but a lot of them are actually sort of front stores for European investment funds. So they're backed by EU investment funds, specifically for tech startups. That means that some of them will start to have to look at their portfolio and say we can't have more than X% of non-UK businesses in our portfolio, or the other way around. So in funding, no one really knows how it's going to pan out, but there's quite a few people are nervous there. Then data flows. Fortunately, the UK government has at least said they want to stay in the GDPR, which is the European Privacy Regulation, and they hope to receive adequacy qualifications, which means that the UK laws will be considered adequate to the same level as the EU. The reason the UK government said that is that if they wouldn't, they would lose most of their startups because they can't serve their customers anywhere else in the UK. So it's only become a local company, and most startups are international. Then most startups do services. Obviously, as we've read, WTA doesn't do services. In Theresa May's deal, there's hardly any full-time services. And so a lot of those issues are still going to be discovered. What suddenly happened won't happen anymore after Brexit. And it's very hard to prepare for because we still don't really know where we go. And then VAT, suddenly if your whole business model, if you have a funding model based on certain prices, and suddenly you may have to charge VAT where you haven't, or where you wouldn't normally have to, or you need to keep track of VAT levels per country. The more I read about VAT, the less I understand about it. It's extremely complex, and that is going to probably be another nightmare scenario. Then, if you look at all the problems for businesses, you'd expect every single business to be extremely vocal, to be extremely on the front foot, in the news all the time. And actually, that's not really what's happening. So you see a few big companies who are very quick to respond. So the Airbus, Rolls-Royce, later joined by a lot of tech startups, airlines, car manufacturers. But a lot of them have a benefit, especially if you're Airbus. Your clients are airlines, not some random guy from the Labour heartland. Same goes for Rolls-Royce. They have two customers, Airbus or Boeing. So for them, it's relatively easy to sound the alarm, to be critical of what's happening. If you're in fast-moving consumer goods, like you sell toothpaste or did I say soap, for instance, you see those companies are much more careful with going out there and letting their staff know, because half of their customers may have voted leave. And it's a very clear distinction. You've seen it for the last 2 years that there are certain companies who are very easy to criticise, and they basically have very little to lose, only to gain. But Unilever, for instance, you won't see Unilever really be on the forefront of this battle because that's a risk to them. And so, this debate is going to go on for at least 10 years. And I think in the next decade, you will still see certain companies be more careful than others. And I think for whatever campaign, there'll probably be a campaign to rejoin the EU on the 30th of March. I think even then, you have to bear in mind, focus on the companies that are able to talk about Brexit and what it has done to them. And this is a slide that comes from HR research. A friend of mine did this for a company who wanted to know what's the impact of Brexit on their hiring. And I think you can clearly see, I don't know if there are any Irish people here, suspect you are Irish. No? No.
We are Irish.
Right.
We
So-
have the golden passport.
Exactly. So, if you look at the table, then you see that you're on the top. So, if you're one of those people who believes that that Angela Merkel is secretly running the EU behind the scenes, that's now Leo Varadkar. He is the new Emperor of Europe, and the Irish citizens are the new kings. Because if you see in the top row, because of the common transport area, they can, for them nothing changes. They're still in there, they can still move to the UK, they can still live and work and property, they can still vote in the UK, and they also keep all those rights in all the other 27 countries. If you go one level below, then you're looking, it's a small group, but still, you see the Cypriot and Maltese, who are, do not have the common tribal area, but have EU citizenship and the Commonwealth, which means that they can still vote for UK members. Then one level below, and that's where it gets really controversial. You see EU27 nationals currently living in the UK. They lose the right to vote, at least for national government, potentially also for local government. No, but you had the right to local government.
Local government.
No, not for national. So if you get social status, at least you have the same economic rights. And obviously, you still have the rights, the same rights in every other 27 countries. Then you get UK nationals living in the UK, and these two bands are a bit contentious because it depends on what you value. So some people value political participation more than the right to live in a country that they wouldn't want to live in the first place. So it depends a bit on your personal preference. But UK citizens living in the UK are going to lose the right to live in another part of in any of the 27 countries, and they're going to lose the right to influence the EU political process. And I think that is one of the things that has been missing in this whole debate, the value of citizenship, and especially the value of EU citizenship. It's probably one of my most valuable possessions. I'm still going to be an EU citizen in 2 months, but over 60 million people in this country are going to lose their citizenship. I think there's a lot of, are going to lose their EU citizenship, and there's a lot of, I think that's lost a bit on a lot of people. Now, there is some good news, as I promised. This is not in London. This is a Romanian anti-corruption demonstration and a Ukrainian anti-Putin demonstration. And these are scenes we're quite used to. We're used to seeing this, we're used to seeing the European flag on TV in faraway places demonstrations. But never in the UK until a few years ago. And I think that is something that has really changed. There has never been a time, there's never been a time where so many people in the UK knew so much about the EU. I studied political science in the 1990s in the Netherlands. You had to work really hard not to be focused on the EU. The EU was everything. And yet, in the last 2 years, I've learned more about the EU than I have in all the 20 other years before that. And that goes for a lot of people in the UK. I think what you now have is a group of people who care very much about the EU, know a lot about the EU. There are no countries elsewhere in the EU where people talk about non-tariff barriers underneath newspaper articles. I didn't know what they were, and it's my area. So I think it's the end of my presentation, but it's definitely not the end of the debate. And I think even in the case of what most people consider the worst case scenario of a no deal, I think we're going to spend the next 10, 15 years trying to get back as close to the EU as possible. And I think we're going to end up in a situation very similar to now, but without representation. Some people in Westminster won't like that, but it's not for them to say anything, to be honest. I think Westminster has sort of voluntarily demoted itself. Yeah.
Good. Thanks very much. I think we ought to give a great round.
think what we'll do, if we may, is take a round of questions and answers, and then everyone will, in questions and comments, and then everyone will have the opportunity to respond. Andrew first, brief introduction, if you will.
Hi, yeah, my name's Andrew. Hello, can you hear me? Yes, no? No? Yes, okay, good. Andrew Black from GPI.
You speak up here.
Yeah, thank you very much for those interesting contributions. I have a question for the whole panel. Really. Is this, can anybody explain to me why in this country, in the UK, the efforts for training in these various professional areas have been so lamentable that we seem to be unable to produce the right number of skilled people, and have therefore become almost incredibly dependent on people coming in from the outside? That's the simple question, very complicated answer.
Good.
Right, Ruby Ziegler, Chair of the UK. So actually, following up from this, is there any threshold, any criterion that the government would have been potentially able to employ in a post-Brexit immigration white papers that would not be damaging the UK economy?
Good. Yeah.
We have a lot of statistics
Introduce.
This Ransom, I'm an urbanist working a lot across Europe, so I'm also first European, second. But anyway, so I was interested that I knew quite a bit about this.
Can't hear
you.
You've got to.
So,
Very,
like so.
yeah.
Anyway, so my question is, has anyone done some work on the statistics of UK nationals who are living in the EU now and want to come back to this marvellous paradise of the UK post-Brexit?
Good. I think someone's back there also. Any more questions?
Yeah, I've got a very serious question about.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. My name is Hugh Warlock. I was educated at Cologne Music College and Cologne University, as well as the University of Essex, and I really am very upset about the loss of my European citizenship. Is there anything you can do to address this issue? I feel I'm European. I want to resign my citizenship in the UK. And I want to denounce quit. Thank you.
Yes, please go. Last time I came to this meeting, I've got 2 black eyes when I went home from some Brexiteers. Not such a good evening. History won't repeat itself back. But my point really is, do we really believe the suggestions that somehow, if we turned back on Brexit, that there would be this overriding civil unrest? Because I consider myself an exception rather than the rule. Is there have the panel got any thoughts on the social impact rather than the economics, which I get?
Any more questions? One more over there.
I'm Richard Seabohm. I was a civil servant negotiating directives from time to time in Brussels, and then I worked in Brussels as a lobbyist. And there's and also, I've been talking to engineer, well, he's particularly an engineer, the regulations and such that the EU has apparently imposed on us are very often designed by the Brits. And there is no platform on which one can put these points. Why have we, as Remainers, had no decent platform to put our cases?
Thank you. I think we'll reverse the order of speakers. So if you would start, answer those are the questions that you want. Not everybody has to answer every question.
Well, so I'd like to speak about civil unrest. I think I'm quite sympathetic to a lot of the Brexit voters. I think a lot of them had an anger where they had a right to be angry, because I think ultimately it's a social inequality problem. It's a problem of lack of social mobility, and I think a lot of that anger was they were right to have it. I have very little time for racism, I have very little time for British exceptionalism, but I think if we address those issues, then I think we can turn this around. And I think that is, I'm not very hopeful about this, but I think if whatever happens now, I think that's what the focus of the next 10 years should be, to make sure that there's people who are felt left behind, that we do something to make them sort of feel part of progress, part of the country where things going here. And I think that can go a long way to having an understanding, wanting to listen to what they have to say, and having an honest debate. So hopefully no black eyes. I think that will help a lot. And then I think to skills, I'm not the best person to answer, but I think one of the things I'd like to say is I think if you pay nurses so little that people don't want to study to become a nurse, I think that is the core of the problem. If you don't want to invest in the NHS, then my partner herself was a consultant, and most of her nursing staff from all over Europe, very few are British. And I think that is one of the key problems. If you pay more, I think you'll get more Brits to come through the ranks. Those are the two things I'd like to say.
Thank you. Probably comment on the same things, and actually I largely agree with what you said. In relation to skills, I think it is partly an issue of pay. It's also partly an issue, a much more deep-seated issue about British culture, particularly when you look at technical, engineering, scientific skills, where there is a historic underrepresentation of women and other groups in the workforce. So what we're doing is picking from a limited section of the potential talent. So there's a bigger issue there. I think it's not helped by the fact that a lot of people are confused by the continuing cycle of changes in education and training, and therefore they don't have confidence that any particular thing is going to stick in the long term, and therefore take a risk-averse approach to it. I think that employer ownership of skills, although that's good in certain respects, I think we lack the long-term planning at the national or strategic level about future skills needs. So a lot of the skills we're talking about can't be developed in 1 or 2 years. It needs a longer-term approach to planning that. Having said all that, I also think that in certain areas, genuinely, it is good to have European and international collaboration because that's an element of diversity and bringing in skills from all over, which benefits everybody. So I think, you have to look at it from both ways. In terms of civil unrest, I agree, a lot of this is about the long-term effects of austerity and people feeling they haven't got anything further to lose. So I would hope that whatever political settlement we come to, we do need to address that, and I think that is more than a 10-year programme. However, I also think we're seeing a failure of leadership. We're seeing politician after politician stand up and say, that's not what democracy is about, we have to stick with this vote. For me, it's very simple. People voted for whatever reason on the concept or an idea. Nobody had any idea what that would lead to in practice, what the implications of that would be. In my world, we send people away to negotiate, and then they come back and tell us what they've got, and we're allowed to vote on what they've got. It's a simple argument. It's an argument that where we could have seen political leadership, not just this week or this month, but since 2016. I fear it's a bit late now, but the optimist in me says it's never too late to start. That's certainly what we're doing in my organisation. But I would also say to you, Peter, we've got civil unrest, we've got division now, haven't we? So we're not in a good place now. So I think we need leadership to get us into a better place.
Right, I'm going to take the following issues. Why is training so poor in the UK? There's a lot of good training in the UK. So manufacturing apprenticeship is 4 years long, and on average it costs a £100,000 to train an apprentice. They will get at most £27,000 from government if they're lucky. That's going down. So it's a huge lot of investment, and we train people. But there's an awful lot of chopping and changing. The priority of skills. As an initiative lasted 18 months. And I think we've got 12 initiatives in 8 years. And if you're really confused, you can look at basic education in the UK, because a good pass at GCSE level in maths is 5, and a pass is 4, but a pass in English is C. So if you want to be really confused, then you could be an employer trying to understand the basic UK education system and work your way through it, because it doesn't make any sense to any of us. UK nationals living in the EU are being all but abandoned. There's about 1 million of them. A piece of work I'm doing at the moment, which is why the photo set off, is through our European sister organisations trying to find out what's happening to them. Which in plain English means this: in the event of a no deal, if you're a UK national living in one of 27, what happens? And should my members be chartering planes to bring them back home? And the answer is, we don't know, and I can't see any place in government that is trying to find out. I've asked the Home Office, and they say ask the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. We look at the FCO, and they say, sounds like one for number 10. So we don't have no idea, if you're a UK national living in the EU, where do you go for this information? And we don't know. So I'm doing work with our sister organisations to try and find out what the systems are, and they are different for every single member state, because it is then a member state competence. So UK nationals living in the EU, good exam question, put on a postcard to number 10, I would say. Loss of EU citizenship, our colleague at the end, I don't think there's anything that can be done. That ship sailed last year with the EU Trawl Act, which converts EU law to UK law, retains it but changes it. But importantly, it retains but doesn't convert the treaties. So your treaty right to be an EU citizen as of 29th of March just vanishes in the UK, I'm afraid.
The one question that hasn't yet been answered is the threshold.
I'll leave that one to last though. So the first one actually about divisions. And so I think what's quite interesting is if you look at the way that opinion has gone since the referendum, in particular, regardless of, I think actually people's decisions around the sort of the Remain haven't really shifted an awful lot. But what has really shifted is people's views about immigration, both the salience of immigration and people's views on whether it's positive or negative, has shifted considerably, and I think that's quite interesting. So is it because they think it's been dealt with? Well, it's a bit too early to say, so probably not. But I think there has been a bit more of a debate. People's eyes have been opened a little bit to, the role that EU migrants play across sectors, and employers have been a bit more vocal. I know they've been a bit concerned about putting their heads above the parapet and all that kind of thing, but I think they have been more vocal about the role that EU citizens play in our vital services and what would happen. So I think that's a sort of more positive thing, although the overall picture is clearly very negative, in that the referendum really did show very clearly what divisions there are in our society, very, very clearly. And I think actually they're going to take some time to heal. The training issue, I think, is really interesting. I do very much agree with what Sue and Tim have said. I think the other thing is that employers can offer training, but it's also got to be attractive to British young people and their parents. And unfortunately, vocational skills have become very much a sort of second-rate option. We've had big expansion in higher education. I think we really have to question whether young people have really benefited from that at all, and whether actually some of that funding could be put into training, which, as Tim says, has been really starved of the cash it needs, because it's very expensive, clearly, to train somebody. So I think that's all got to be made more attractive to British workers. And I think, if we're thinking of potential positives from there being a restriction in immigration, it could be that more investment is made, and the government is talking about aligning its skills strategy and its immigration strategy more closely, and that has to be a positive thing. If it's carried through, but clearly that does require the money as well as the kinds of positive mood music and statements around it. threshold, Rudy, I'm really pleased that you asked that because we've done quite a bit of research with employers about what kind of immigration policies would they find acceptable. And actually, you do find that employers are reasonable about it because they are citizens too. You know, they have opinions on immigration. They live in communities. You know, they listen to other people. So basically, what employers are prepared to demonstrate is that they need to recruit. Because, as I said, you know, it's not the number one option always, or in any case, to recruit migrants. Employers would generally prefer to recruit a British worker working from a local community for various reasons, but often that is not possible, particularly in those skilled sectors. So they'd be quite willing to prove that they tried to recruit through some kind of really arduous process. But something where they have a certificate, a trusted certificate, and that they've gone through various processes in order to try to recruit a local worker. So I think that would be a sensible thing. I think having a sort of shortish occupation is for low skilled is probably taking it too far. The shortish occupation is you know, they change all the time, and I think it probably doesn't apply so much to lower skilled roles. But I think something like that. Also requiring, I think employers actually think it's quite reasonable for them to offer somebody a job before they arrive in the UK. So they're prepared for all those kinds of things. And I think putting the sort of the high salary threshold and qualification threshold and the skills threshold at that high level is clearly not going to work.
Thank you. Good. Thank you very much indeed. I think we have to close it down and do take a coffee. I had believed for a long time that I was entitled to an Irish passport because I thought my maternal grandfather had been born in Ireland. Turns out that he was born in London, having been conceived in Ireland. So I'd always understood that the great problem about that was that I couldn't play for the Irish football team, or indeed the Irish cricket team when they start playing Test cricket team later this year. But it turns out there are worse deprivations that I've been to undergo. So thank you very much for all our panelists. One brief point I do want to make on the question of civil unrest. I don't myself expect that there would be civil unrest, but what I find truly shocking and appalling is that you have leading politicians who speak as if the democratic decision on whether we have a referendum or not, whether we leave the European Union or not, should be influenced by the prospect of violence. This is mentioned in a sort of condoning, smirking way, exactly like George Wallace in his resistance to desegregation. Well, of course, I'm very much against violence myself, but people will react with violence. And by talking about it in this understanding, nod and a wink way, in fact, you do open the door to violence. And we talk rightly about the social and economic problems of Brexit. But in my view, the legacy of Brexit, which has already happened, is a destruction of our political culture. Lies and the threat of violence have now become absolutely standard, par for the course. Whenever a politician is shown to have been lying, they never feel any necessity to admit it or apologize because they think it's a sign of weakness. And objective truth is simply less important than passionate belief. And once you've gone down that road, then you are in deep trouble. And I think we're in deep trouble in this country. And I'm afraid our panelists very rightly have drawn attention to aspects of that. And I think we need to give them another round of applause. We'll be convening again at 4:45, quarter to five.
We're giving continental time.
Yeah, I don't think.
A while ago, 2010.
Not delivery.
In that presentation, also there was an idea in the north weight of so much participation and migration.
It's not playing.
Hi, I just want to say hello. Nice to see you. It's a long time. I know, I saw you on the list. I was just saying, Jackie's doing second table. Oh, I didn't know Gemma as well. I didn't see her come in. Oh, I hope she's got here all right. And we came in, yeah. We came with Louise. Louise, yes. Yeah. No, Louise lives in London. But yeah, I mean, we didn't have very clear instructions from Roger, so I mean, we can talk about something.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
I don't know if Michaela's prepared. Michaela should chat. Oh, Michaela, how are you? What are you going to talk about?
I'm doing the second question,
Which has changed.
Oh,
You've done for us. I'll do social care then. How?
I've got some comments.
Roger just, I didn't have
Roger didn't give us clear instructions.
I haven't got a PowerPoint. And he said 4 minutes. 4 minutes.
Four?
He never said 4 minutes.
Well, he doesn't really organise.
I know, so actually, I'm just going to have to talk to what everybody
I think that's
I think that's fine.
Okay, it'll be fine, it'll
I'm changed. I'm glad you got because the middle one was originally Costa Brava. I can speak to the first two of those.
You're going to do your French people.
Oh, good. So I'll do the third one, and also Bachi, the one on the television. Is that the person here from Costa Brava?
Yes.
Yes.
Joe.
All right. I think I better have heard of them. Yes, he spoke of them on his the one that was about a year ago. Yeah, anti-Brexit.
Yeah, no, the anti-Brexit.
He definitely spoke, and a woman from one of the expats from Spain spoke. He was brilliant, remain in Spain. He definitely spoke.
Oh, well, I've got it, but I don't know this one second. So I'm just going to put these up on the table. If you ladies feel you're equipped now, more or less. I think the confirmation. I don't know if you want, I just get new ones. Okay, excellent biscuits, aren't they? I'm going to get you some new boxes. I don't know if people open this box.
What I can just do is still go
Why not?
reduce it then release to
Just like bring them just to 20%. It's easy to say that. Yeah, reflection that is trying to problem at the moment the way it's what is called the vanguard, so they get all the money and they get all the gas. And obviously every time they get Mr. Accounts wants to say something about the NHS, you get a comment, that's a very childish. But the 90% of what they get it behind. And the gap is growing. And it's hospitals, some of them not developed and they don't have Wi-Fi. You don't have and then they even the government say, this is something that will happen, this is that's not a reality. You know, I cannot even book my appointment with my GP online. You know, I need to present online. It's impossible. But yeah, but even that, why can't I can do all my life from my example except my health. And that's completely wrong. Should be able if you want to change an appointment, you can change it. If you go to the GP, they tell you what time you should go to the GP. So there's something what exactly to do. You know, it should be show me what problem you have, and then I choose the protocol and then do that. You know, that's not the way the GP works. And also, I asked one of the folks, in my town, I live in Chesterfield, there are 60 GPs. If I have an emergency, why do I need to go to my GP? Why is not the system telling me which other GP I have an appointment and I can book you without it? Doesn't say, no, but they tell that that's the way, if you do that, how do I pay the GP? What do you do? Every GP does have a number of patients, they can go back, you go to the GP, and your GP doesn't say, oh, I don't care about that, you sort it out electronically, you can see what's going on and everything, and then someone will say, you know, you do it now. Basically, you Brexit, the hospitals, people go to any, because the GP system will not take the problems. Oh yeah.
Hi, I am. Hi, Jackie. A year ago, yeah, I've had just been great.
Basically, for me, it's no longer, it's impossible to deliver safe care at the moment in this situation for various reasons, not only Brexit, but the Brexit is just the last nail in the coffin.
So just so that I have an idea as to what you're talking about. And then started to just to make sure that I covered key points. I don't know, like, sorry. Well, actually, you sure this audience will especially
Seems to be a thing of Yorkshire today.
or like the ones that have
Oh, yes,
Let's go ahead. I can see more weather going to join Ireland. Scotland actually kind of
demographically, because normally I'm sure as a literary stuff, you would say, well, views, yeah, they're all different directions, and maybe love to choose that, you have and you as an editor would media and say, well, I think you should just look at these. But instead, what you do, that's what the editor did, you were one of this, all these excellent points from this record, and you were two making all these excellent points, this should really address those, and then you would add some points from like, oh, they want to use some of the economic issues. So it was like 4 through you. It is true. So we were directing an extension because there was no way we could do 10 organizations in 9 months on top of other things and other deadlines with nothing else to do for 3 months. That's a really situation here, folks. So yeah, we are going to do it because it's such a good journal. We have an opportunity to crack and get it out the door. South of Belgium as well. Much too much. We're meeting up to this year, always back to the
yeah, that's fine.
Yes, yeah. A few more people than that. So if you are happy to do that, either now or after the summer, yeah. And if you don't need to start straight away, obviously, we could perhaps do it afterwards. Yeah, just to give you
It's made me feel that other people
Did you organise this in? I think
it's just to remind us do you want more things? That's what I've got to. Sometimes, I mean,
I organize from the role of the nursing house community. Nursing and everything else belong to a lot of different groups, and I go anywhere that anybody wants to look at the NHS into the obviously the NHS before the campaign and after the campaign has been a big topic of that, and I don't know why there's not a lot of nurses who are willing to talk about what's happening. And it seems that it goes to all these events, and I don't mind.
I moved to stories
Yeah, so that's one of the main comments. Like what I think Brexit is stupid things that will Yeah. Since Brexit, I received at least 20 employment offers from outside England just to go down. With Europeans, we've been targeted with emails to try to attract us to do so more has been included. American, but most of a lot of the land have to go because the salaries, conditions, and everything is out there. So they have a money, so we don't have to move. Yeah, that is I see on my colleagues that we divide into groups now. The younger that don't have an attachment and everything in the mid-20s, a lot of them are left and they go to Ireland and place. Then I hear the overbooked is like all them. So what's the to do 15, 20 years to can we because yeah. Yeah.
I was teaching by a journalist.
But a lot of us have planned in 5, 6, 10 years time to leave unless something changes dramatically. Still have hope, but if I have Brexit comes, as soon as my kids have grown up and they're going to want me anymore, as a nurse, I can go anywhere in the world.
In the end, anyway, we went back. But it was such a low when I said someone really, it was.
I've had so many times when you come down there, like, time, because you actually care about it.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
No, they're great. I mean, I get regularly, every year, I get 3 or 4 inquiries from journalists.
I don't want to any right to know.
And you think to yourself,
I want to do what I want to say.
why are you doing it? And they do. I mean, one of the things is like, and you've left it to the last minute. So they're obviously being trained in that. This is what you do, you approach academics.
Does anyone have change of £20?
I don't have change of £20. The best I might have would be 2 tenors, but
That would be fine. I need to split 2 tenors. Now, question, this is a trust question. I'm not a politician.
You don't have £20?
I'm going to take the £20 and bring back an amount from the receptionist, £20.
If you give me
Well, that-
£20 note, then
You're not going to trust me.
sorry.
Oh, that's fine. I'm not an insulator. I'll go and get the £20. That's 2 trips for me.
Oh, okay, okay, sorry. I'm going to start now, so I won't disturb you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 6 for the second panel.
I think you need the microphone, madam.
Would you put Theresa May do that?
Right, I hope everyone can hear. So welcome back, everyone, to this second panel, which is going to look at the social impact of Brexit. We heard in the first panel of some of the economic impacts, the way in which Brexit will affect employers and employees. Here we're going to look at people as individuals. How will it affect their sense of identity, their feelings towards the United Kingdom, be they British or a citizen of one of the other member states? How will it affect us in our communities, in particular perhaps as recipients of services, social care, healthcare, other services, largely provided in significant part by EU citizens? We have a very distinguished panel, as distinguished from the first panel. Their biographies are on the programme, so I won't waste time introducing them individually. I have asked that their presentations be kept to 10 minutes maximum, which will allow us plenty of time for questions and discussions afterwards. So we begin with Professor Louise Ryan of the Migration Research Group at the University of Sheffield.
I know everybody's been struggling with microphones, so I think I just have to hold it like this. So just following on the thread from the panel earlier this afternoon where everybody seemed to be defining themselves in relation to Yorkshire. Yes, I am at the University of Sheffield. No, I am not from Yorkshire, and yes, I do possess an Irish passport. So I think I've pretty much positioned myself there in relation to all our important geographical and political touchstones. So what I'm going to do is to present some of the findings from the research I've been doing, longitudinal research, with EU citizens living in the UK. And this is a topic of research I've been doing for about 20 years. I don't have a PowerPoint, so I'm just going to be presenting. I was told not to do a PowerPoint, so you'll probably be saying, it'd be better if these quotes were on the PowerPoint. I quite agree with you, but they're not, so sorry about that. So over 20 years or so, I've been researching EU citizens living in the UK. Never any inclination that this Brexit thing could ever possibly happen. But it's meant that what's happened since the referendum in June 2016 is that I've been able to go back and re-interview my participants. And in that way to try to gauge how their plans, their feelings, their attitudes, their sense of belonging, their strategies have changed since the referendum results. And I, in particular, want to present just some quotes and some stories from two sets of participants. The first ones were Polish migrants, whom I originally interviewed back in 2006, that sort of period in the years immediately after Poland joined the EU, so they were relatively recent migrants when I first encountered them. And also French, highly skilled. And as you will be aware, there's been a massive amount of research on Polish people in the UK. There's a whole industry. You go to conferences and there'll be like half the papers there will be about Polish migration trends over the last 10 years or so. The French are a very under-researched group. I don't know if there are any French people in the audience today. Yes, there's one French lady. A very under-researched and very invisible group. And so what I want to do in presenting some of the quotes is to really contrast the ways in which my Polish participants vocalized some of these issues they felt since Brexit to the way in which the French participants have felt. And I think one of the things that very much comes through there is that many Polish people already felt a bit under the spotlight. They were often held up as the kind of stereotypical new arrival, these migrants coming over taking our jobs. It was often a Polish stereotype. The French, by contrast, were hardly ever mentioned. Now, clearly there's a big disparity in numbers, but nonetheless there is a very significant population of French people, especially in London. I don't even have to mention South Kensington, but you get the picture. And so for the French participants, Brexit was a profound shock because it put them under the spotlight really for the first time as immigrants, which was not something that they had previously felt. And so in my research, going back to people I'd already spoken to 10 years ago or 6 years ago, asked them, since the referendum, how do you now feel? So I haven't prepared a presentation as such, but I really thought it would be very interesting for us to hear the voices of those people, because the first panel, which I thought was a really excellent panel, they presented a lot of statistics, a lot of data, a lot of information. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to tell you about some of the reactions of the people that I spoke to. So the first person I want to talk a bit about is Eva, and obviously the name like Eva, she's from Poland. And she's lived in the UK now for well over 10 years. And when I went back and spoke to her after the referendum, she said, on the day after the vote, I actually couldn't stop crying. The loss of belonging to Europe, the aggressiveness of the out campaign, it was all too much, too sad. And she went on to say, on a personal level, I now feel very unwelcome. And that was a word that was mentioned a lot in the other panel this afternoon, that sense of people feeling unwelcome. And she says that she now felt that British people, from the way they voted, saw her as something to be got rid of, like something undesirable. And she says, but I've been working here, I've been contributing, I've been paying tax, and now I feel completely rejected. And that feeling was also very much echoed by a woman, obviously these are not their real names, a woman I've named Karina. And Karina worked in the NHS, and we've heard the importance of that in the previous panel. And Karina said she was devastated by the Brexit results. She said it was very difficult not to see it as an expression of xenophobia and anti-migrant feeling. And it felt especially awful and maddening to think that we, she meant Polish people in particular, are being blamed for queues in the NHS by the same politicians who approved cuts to NHS budgets. And she then went on to say that she and many of her colleagues, EU citizens working in the NHS, she said, we all stay after hours to manage the workload. And then we have to hear the propaganda that it is because of us that there's a problem in this country. So those were two Polish women who were really devastated and felt so upset. What was interesting for the French participants is that when we originally spoke to them, which I think was back in 2010-11, when we originally did our research with French highly skilled people working in the City of London, so bankers working in finance, particularly around Canary Wharf. And we asked them, actually one of the questions we asked them was, would you ever think of applying for a British passport? And I have to be honest and put my hand up. At the time of the research, my colleague, who's an Englishman, John Mulholland, he was insisting on asking this question. And I was thinking, why are you asking them if they want a British passport? Why would they want a British passport? I didn't think it was a very important question. But boy, am I glad that he asked the question, because we have the data now of what they said before Brexit. And most of them were very nonchalant. I would never want a British passport. I'm French. I'm proud to be French. I'm an EU citizen. I have my rights as an EU citizen. And one of the questions we asked them was, as a follow-up, but you can't vote. And they said, well, I don't think that's important. I don't think I would need to vote. And of course, as we know, one of the big tragedies, one of the many tragedies of the EU referendum is that the over 3 million EU citizens living in this country could not vote. So the decision that was made about their future was a decision in which they had absolutely no voice at all. And so going back, interviewing the French participants in particular, they were absolutely horrified to now find themselves in this position. And they were feeling very exposed, as I said, and they were feeling like migrants for the first time. And I know that perhaps some people, some migrants who have always experienced discrimination, prejudice, and racism, are perhaps feeling, well, now you know what it feels like. So there is an element of that as well. And sometimes, you know, as you sat speaking to a very, very well-paid banker, you mightn't feel like they were the most obvious person to feel sorry for, with their big houses and their big cars. Honestly, I wasn't jealous, but some of them were very, very rich people. But now they felt, one of them said, it makes me sick, I feel sick. She talks about how she's now very nervous of speaking French to her son on the tube, because she gets these hostile stares that she never experienced before. And she's now felt that speaking French has marked her out as a migrant in a way in the past she would feel very proud, and it would feel very normal for her to speak French. When I asked her then, after Brexit, if she would apply for a British passport, she said on a point of principle, she felt that she shouldn't have to apply for a British passport, that it went against the grain of her sense of identity as a French woman and as a European. But nonetheless, she acknowledged that the cost of not doing that might become intolerable if she suddenly was faced with not being able to live here anymore. This was a point that was very interesting in going back and talking to people. Although they felt really upset, tearful even, and some of these people, I was speaking to them a year after the referendum, and they still had tears in their eyes when they started to remember how they felt. And of course, the ongoing debates, it just keeps that wound open all the time. But what was really surprising is that very few of them planned to leave. Although they felt very angry, very upset, rejected, fearful even, they also realized how their lives were embedding in Britain over the years. Now, of course, I should say very clearly that many of my participants had lived in this country for perhaps 10 years or so. So they were not people who had come recently. Many of them had children in schools in this country. They had partners who may have been British or of other nationalities. They had jobs, their partners had jobs, and many of them had houses, or at least they were hoping to buy houses. So they had built a life in this country. And so even though part of them couldn't wait to get away, because they felt so unwanted, they also recognised how difficult that was. And this raises, I think, a very important question for us, because we talked in the first panel about the fact that people are not coming in the same numbers as before, and that there was a decline in the number of people in the labour market from EU countries. But we also do, as researchers, need to try to disentangle who is coming, who's going, and who is staying, and who is likely to stay. And certainly for my participants, it seems that age, length of time that you're here, the stage where you are in the family life cycle, in other words, if you have children in school, these are factors that may actually encourage people to stay despite their feelings of being unwanted. And of course also their labour market position, how secure they feel in their jobs. And for many of the people in the financial sector, of course, as we've heard, they were very worried about their jobs. And so they felt that banks in particular were likely to make big decisions in the next couple of years. And so there was a big uncertainty about their livelihood if Brexit went ahead as it looked like it would. So those are just some of the observations from the research that I've been doing. And I hope that it just kind of humanizes some of the statistics, that these are real people with real lives and children and families, and many of whom have a very strong affinity with this country, have lived here for a long time, and really loved London. That was such a strong theme of the research, this love of London. And this shock, I suppose, that although they lived in London and London had voted Remain, that was not the final decision of a vote in which they had no voice. Thank you very much.
Now, Dr. Magella Kilke, who is also working at least in Yorkshire.
Yeah, you have to be very careful where you say people are from based on their workplace. So I work at the University of Sheffield, I live in York, so yes, I am located in Yorkshire, South and North Yorkshire, very important distinction for us up there. But I'm also from Northern Ireland rather than from the Irish Republic. I was born and brought up in Derry, which of course is a border town and which has its very own complicated story in this Brexit mess. And I hold both an Irish and British passport. The Good Friday Agreement allows us to basically self-determination, to declare to be either Irish or British or both. And Theresa May only really woke up to that factor last week, which she visited, and wanted to look into the fact that people in Northern Ireland who hold Irish passports and who identify as Irish and therefore see themselves as Europeans can't actually use that European citizenship in the context of the UK, because the British government says that British citizenship trumps. In cases, for example, where people want to bring spouses from outside the EU to live with them. So it's even more complicated for people in Northern Ireland, not just with the border, but in terms of identity and what our identities will be allowed to be in the context of Brexit. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. I will pick up on some of the themes Louise Ryan finished with around, will we see lots of people leaving, will there be a Brexit? But first I want to say some things about the social care sector. I know we'll hear about the healthcare sector, but specifically on social care. At the University of Sheffield, we have a large Economic and Social Research Council funded project called Sustainable Care. And we're interested in how care relationships, care systems will be sustainable. And we were writing this proposal before Brexit, before the referendum, and before we knew the results of the referendum. Louise is also involved in this project. So we're very interested in social care in this project and what the consequences of Brexit will be for it. And the consequences won't be that the social care system will save any resources if people leave, EU citizens leave, because of course EU citizens don't use our social care system to any great extent. And that's partly because of demographics, mostly because of demographics, actually. Rather, it's an issue of the workforce, as we've heard about this morning. We've been waiting for a social care green paper for a couple of years now. The government keeps promising it, it keeps being delayed. That is a casualty of Brexit, I believe. One of the other kind of policy areas that's just been pushed to one side as we've desperately tried to deal with this mess. But when Jeremy Hunt set out, when he was Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, and he set out the kind of remit of the Green Paper that we're still waiting for, he said it was about attracting more people into the sector. Financial support must be matched with recognition of the value of this vital work and action on the wider set of challenges facing the workforce. We need a coherent workforce planning that is better aligned with that now being undertaken by the NHS. Probably not, you'll argue. We need to ensure we have enough people within all these skilled roles to support people to live the best possible lives. I mean, Brexit clearly threatens this aspiration. The social care workforce employs an estimated 2 million workers in the UK. Amongst these, migrants constitute a significant minority. It's an average of about 20% across the country, but this increases to almost 50% in London and major cities. While most non-UK born paid care workers, social care workers, traditionally came from countries outside of Europe, like India, like the Philippines. Increasingly, since 2004, they've come from European countries, like Poland, like Romania. And EU migrants now account for the overwhelming share of new entrants to the care workforce. So we know that recruiting and retaining quality care staff is one of the main challenges facing the care sector because of poor conditions and pay, and the fact that, as we heard this morning, we're at an almost full employment situation. Most jobs in social care are not considered high skilled and will not meet the earnings threshold that we've heard about this morning. And the government acknowledges this, and as we've heard, they have proposed a temporary transitional measure for a scheme lasting until 2025 of the time-limited route for temporary short-term workers, including the social care. People will be allowed to come in for 12 months. They'll have to leave after 12 months, cooling off, the government calls it, to prevent permanent working in the UK. Workers will have no rights to public funds, no rights to independence, no right to switch between visas, no route to permanent settlement. It won't be open to citizens of all countries, only low-risk countries, and those the government does mobility deals with, no doubt linked to trade deals. As we heard this morning, it's a guest worker scheme in all but name. So the intention is to create a rotating pool of workers entering for short periods, rather than allowing people to settle, build networks, and acquire country-specific knowledge in the UK. Assuming people will still come, and that's questionable, given that social care and meeting the needs of an ageing population is a challenge in every other European Union country, not to mention elsewhere in the world. So assuming people will come, then inadequacies of such temporary arrangements may not be immediately evident. In the short term, they could appear to satisfy workforce demand in social care, but let's think about the longer term. Due to economic and social costs, which are difficult to quantify and likely to be significant, some of the factors we need to think about are the negative impacts on continuity of care for those being cared for, workers and care users' well-being, turnover and recruitment, loss of skills, and a constant need for retraining in a sector that we already know is not training people properly. Relying on a larger pool of temporary workers would also run counter both to established principles in social care, things like personalisation, choice, quality, valuing relationships between those cared for and those providing care, and the government's own proposals relating to valuing the care workforce, developing social care careers, and so on. A further concern is the link between migration restrictions and the risk of labour exploitation. Factors that increase risk and/or vulnerability to exploitation for migrant workers include limited rights to change jobs or sector, time restrictions, with typically no right to family reunification, or access to public funds for housing or employment benefits, precisely the provisions the government is proposing. In social care, the combination of restricted migrant worker rights and precarious employment conditions could increase the risk of exploitation. Labour inspection and enforcement in the UK is limited and largely reactive. Resources to carry out proactive enforcement are scarce, and sector-specific intelligence is limited. The regulatory enforcement and inspection of social care do not extend to employment practices, although this is increasingly recognised as a challenge. So I ask, is this the environment we want, or I want, my mother, my father, myself in the future, or our children who might have long-term disabilities? Is this the environment we want them to be cared within?
Maybe I'll stop there.
So now, Dr. Michaela Benson from Goldsmiths.
So I use this one, everyone else has been using. Unfortunately, I wasn't here in the first session, although I realised there's a Yorkshire disclosure going on. So I'll disclose my Yorkshire, which is when I first met Magella in East Yorkshire, or the East Riding as it was known at that time, at the University of Hull. I subsequently, at another point, went to work at the University of York, so I've done my Yorkshire time. I think I've spent a third of my life in Yorkshire. I currently do not live in Yorkshire, but I spent part-time in London, and I lived in Canterbury, in the sea of leaving Europe, voting Kent. I am the project lead for a UK and Changing Europe funded project that's all about what Brexit means for British citizens who live in the EU 27. A little bit like the French in London, although there might be slightly more research in the area of British citizens who live abroad. When it comes to talking about migration, British citizens receive very little coverage. And there are lots of reasons for that, which I'll explain in a minute. My project has been quite vast. It's a sociological project. We've been talking with British people living across the EU 27. And I should just call out to my team, Professor Caroline O'Reilly, who is probably the best known person who's ever worked on British citizens who live abroad, author of the book The British Occupancy of Soul, and two amazing researchers, Catherine Collins and Chantal Lewis. I myself have 15 years of experience of working with and writing about British people living in France. And more recently, through the project, we started to consider British people living across the EU 27, including in Ireland, which is a very particular case that has a very sizable population of British citizens, notably not British citizens of Northern Irish origin. In fact, until very recently, British citizens in Ireland were the largest migrant population in Ireland, an audible minority. So I'm going to pick up on some voices of British people in Europe who are kind of a lesser known story about Brexit. But before I move on to that, I want to focus a little on that first question. I think when we think about who's leaving the UK at this point in time, we are focused on the EU citizens who are leaving. And it took me back this morning when I was preparing for this talk to a moment in 2008 when I went for a job interview. And the job interview, as all job interviews, was quite nerve-wracking, quite anxiety-inducing. And a senior male colleague on the interview panel turned around towards the end of the interview and he said to me, well, you know, given the crash, your research topics are no longer going to be of any relevance. British people will stop leaving the UK in this time of austerity, which I thought was particularly nice advice for an early career academic trying to take their first steps in a career. I will disclose later who that person was. I knew he was wrong, and the reason that I knew he was wrong was because in the work that I had done with British people living in France, I knew that at moments of major economic and political transformation, people leave. They are just as likely to leave in times of major economic and political transformation as they are in times of economic growth. And I think that this is really important to bear in mind as we think about Brexit. It's probably interesting to note that the estimates produced by the International Passenger Survey demonstrate that in 2017, 95,000 British citizens born in Britain left the UK. This is a third of all people leaving the UK for purposes of long-term migration. And I think that this is something that we should think about. I'm very unsurprised that British people are choosing to leave the UK at a time when Britain's exit from the EU is imminent. And while I realise that not all of those British people who are leaving because of Brexit, and not all of them are moving to Europe, I think we probably need to have a look at that. And yet, there is no national conversation about immigration. In fact, there's no conversation about immigration. Instead, the British government is fixated on presenting Britain as an immigration nation. Migration has always worked in two directions. It's the premise of colonialism, let's be honest. Britain has always been as much an emigration nation as an immigration nation. And when it comes to freedom of movement, it probably doesn't surprise anybody in the audience to note that freedom of movement is best understood as two-way traffic. So in terms of Brexit specifically, the challenges that British people choosing to face by their compatriots who are already settled, these are associated with the loss of EU citizenship, the need to demonstrate lawful residence, while they wait for further indications from member states about how they will implement the Brexit deal. And I should just point out that I'm aware that settled status has been introduced in the UK. There is no equivalent in most EU member states. They have not yet decided what they will do after Brexit to transfer those who have lawful residence into whatever new status is to come, or indeed what will happen to them in the case of no deal. So I went back to France after a few years in 2017, and like Louise, I started to talk to people with before about what Brexit meant for them. I tried to understand those legal and political transformations within the context of their lives and think about what the changing relationship between Britain and Europe does to their lives and the terms on which these have been established and conducted until now. And just to give you a little bit of a sense, imperfect as the figures are for Europeans living in the UK, when we start to try and enumerate British citizens who live in other parts of the EU or indeed other parts of the world, we have very, very limited resources to draw on to actually count them. So the figures and estimates are highly imprecise and inaccurate. The most recent figures produced will tell you that 900,000 British citizens live in the EU. Specifically, these are 900,000 British citizens who live in the EU who are likely to be affected by Brexit. This is the actual terminology used by the Office for National Statistics. And there are all sorts of caveats about it. We think those statistics are wrong. There are a lot of reasons why we think they're wrong. And as my colleague Karen O'Reilly has argued, it's likely that a far larger number of British citizens live and work in Europe. Importantly, these are about settled populations. Those statistics only count people who are settled. And we know, just as for many other nationalities, there are lots of British people who are highly mobile. And we're not just talking about people who are excessively wealthy. We are talking about seasonal workers. We're talking about people who work in the hospitality industry. I'm sure that all of you know people who have gone and worked for a chalet season in the Alps, or have gone and done some bar work. This is very common for young British people, particularly in the context of an economy which basically where there's no long-term work for young people. So I think that's very important. And yet we get dogged by very unhelpful stereotypes of British people in Europe, and I'm sure most of you by now will have seen whatever Channel 4 decided to pour out the other day about British people who live in Spain who voted for Brexit. Of course there are British people abroad who voted for Brexit, but they are by far not the majority of people living in the EU. Sorry, I'm on the rant, I realise. And it's been one of the biggest challenges we face as a project is in coming up against those unhelpful stereotypes of British people who live abroad. So, just very simply, the Eurostat statistics, which I think are probably a little bit more accurate than what the ONS has got, reveal that 79% of British people living in the EU are of working age and below. It includes children who are born and raised in the EU, who would not be counted in the other statistics, people occupying a range of positions in the labour market. Just like the general population of Britain as a whole, it includes British people of colour. I think this is a really important thing to point out. And the list goes on. And there are multiple reasons for people living in the EU. There's nothing singular about the British migrant experience. So a couple of illustrative examples. Take Kate, for example. She met her French husband in London in the 1990s, and about 14 years ago, when he lost his job, and she decided that she wanted to change from a high-pressure work environment in London, they decided to try their luck in France. Why not? They had years of temporary and part-time work, and then just as they were thinking about turning around and returning to London, her husband got a contract, and then now settled into Leeds with their 3 children. And in her words, they are the quintessential European family. They woke up on the day after the Brexit referendum and turned to each other and said, they just voted against everything we are. Or Julie, a 22-year-old university student studying at the University of Toulouse. She was taken to France as an 11-year-old by her parents. Her family have never returned to Britain since, not even for a visit. Her mum was a local councillor in the French village that they settled in. So these 2 examples just try to draw out some of the diversity within that population. And at present, what we're finding with British citizens living across Europe is that their lives are marked by a need to demonstrate lawful residence, while they wait for further indications from member states about how they will implement the Brexit deal, or what the terms will be which mean they can stay put. And some British citizens living in the EU are clearly in a favourable position of being able to take preemptive actions that limit Brexit's impact on them. So that might include applying for citizenship in the places where they live, and notably in places where dual nationality is permitted. Of course, not all member states permit that. Applying for citizenship, notably of Ireland, through ancestry, is another strategy that people are taking. And applying for residence permits as EU citizens, which exist in all member states. Importantly, I would stress here, it's a privilege to be in a position where you're able to take matters into your own hands and secure your future, or indeed to be able to wait and see what hand you are going to be dealt. And where some people are well networked and know where to turn for information about how to secure their futures, it's also clear that there are others who don't have access to such resources and support, for who the route maps to securing their futures are not visible. And I think that we should be concerned about how to communicate credible information about those. I will just give one example, just to kind of communicate how this can articulate with individual circumstances in particular ways. So Robert in Spain, before he moved to Spain, he was a Spanish teacher and translator. He was in his 40s when he moved to Spain. Unfortunately, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's in his 50s. He described a kind of a fear of the unknown about his future, what was going to happen. What happens if by the time Brexit comes, he's too ill, too disabled to make decisions about his future? He can't afford to wait and see. And the question that he's faced with is, should I stay or should I go? And I think that this points to how those who are vulnerable from the point of view of complex health and social care needs might need to repatriate to secure their futures. But I should also point out that there are questions about who can afford to repatriate and under what conditions. And in the case of earlier research with British citizens living in Spain, we know that there have been situations where people have had to be supported to repatriate when they've had complex health and social care arrangements. And just as for other people entering the UK, British citizens returning after long-term residence abroad might find themselves subject to habitual residence testing. And I think that this starts to open up a whole range of questions about what happens to these people. Who can afford the costs of resettlement in the UK? How will they be socially reintegrated? And also, how will they afford housing? Which I think is a question that we've probably overlooked until now. So that's just a few insights, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to our last speaker, who's going to be brave enough to try a different mic. Is that right?
No, I can try mine. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Joe. As you can see by my accent, I'm not British. I'm Spanish, but I also have a Yorkshire connection. I'm here representing the Europeans. I live in UK, but also I'm here because I work on the NHS. And I've been hit double by Brexit. And I say that because for a long time, the NHS is being left to hand dry out. And Brexit, in my opinion, will be the last nail in the coffin for the NHS. The Brexit was shown to a lot of people for the holy grail to save the NHS, for the fantastic boost that Mr. Johnson put on the side, the 350 million will go back to NHS, that immediately, the day after the referendum, nobody was owned to that. And that, also for me, has been one of the biggest lies. And unfortunately, that's what the balance was for Brexit. Don't forget, the NHS is one of the jewel crowns of this country. And it's one of the reasons because I came to this country to work for the NHS. And like me, a lot of migrants came. The NHS is one of the most multicultural institutions in the world. There's over 200 nationalities working alongside each other. And I never felt a migrant. I never felt foreign. I always feel welcome. And I arrived to this country 18 years ago in Sheffield, that is in Yorkshire. And from day one, I fit perfectly well. I did marry a Yorkshire woman. I have 3 kids. And despite what the Sunday and the Daily Mails tell you, I don't live in a ghetto. I live with everybody. I socialize, I contribute. All of my friends are British. People and Europeans, they don't live in a town all together. They are your cleaners, your doctors, your nurses, your solicitors. We are part of this society. And a lot of people talk about the 3 millions, but it's not 3 millions who have been affected. We all have, partners, wives, children. It's at least, I can look on the top of my head, 7, 8 millions who are going to be affected by this Brexit and by this uncertainty. And I'll tell you that one. After 2 years, I still don't know what's going to happen with me. After 2 years, I don't know what's going to happen on the 29th of March. I could apply for settled status, but unfortunately it's on a pilot at the moment, and it will not open to the public till the 31st of March, 2 days after Brexit. I have no idea what I need to do on the 29th if we come out of Brexit. Do I turn up to the war? I have no idea. And not only that, there's been a lot of progress on my rights, and a lot of things have been given to me. I have more or less similar rights as I had before Brexit. One of them I'm going to lose is possibly the vote on local elections. Another one that people overlook is Mrs. May have made me a prisoner of this island. If I leave for, I think it's 2 years, I lose all my rights. I mean, if I have the misfortune that my mom or some of my relatives gets ill and I need to take care of her, I have two options. I can bring her, but my mom doesn't speak any English. I mean, would be nonsense. Or I can go there and take care of my mom or my relative. Or even if they offer me a fantastic job in Australia, I cannot accept any job anywhere now in the world, because if I do that, I can basically jeopardize the future of my children and my grandchildren. And on the top of that, my current rights on the settled status, they're only protected for 7 years. At the moment, this settled status is overlooked by European Union and by British government. after 7 years, the European Union disappeared, and the Prime Minister can do anything they want with my rights without going to Parliament. And believe me, looking at what happened to the Windows generations, I don't want my future to be on the hands of the Home Office. I mean, that is my dilemma. I'm 43, I've been here for 20 years, I have another 20 years of on my career, hopefully I have another 40 to live on, and I find myself in a country that I don't know what rights I'm going to have for the rest of my life. And that's creating me a lot of anxiety. Not only me, it's creating anxiety to other people, and I'm very angry. But people don't talk about that. And then you just say, how is that affecting the NHS? It's clearly, because when I came here 17 years ago, I did study nursing in Spain, in Barcelona, and I tried to find a job in Spain. For 3 years, I tried very hard, and I ended up working as a pizza delivery. You know, after 3 years, I have a career in nursing, couldn't find a job. 25 years with my mom and dad in a very small flat in Barcelona. I said, it needs to be something better. And then, as a nurse, I can choose anywhere I want to go in the world. This is the shortest worldwide of nurses. I can go to Australia, I can go to Canada, to America, to Australia. This is a shortage of 800,000 nurses in USA. In here, in this country, at the moment, it's 40,000 vacancies of just nurses. And if you talk on the top of that, the provisions is that it's going to be 50,000, another 10,000 by the time that in the next 2 years. I'm a manager on the NHS, and I need to tell you, I'm struggling to be able to provide safe care for my patients. And that's made me very uneasy at night. A lot of nights I wake up in the middle of the night and say, how am I going to find my hospital in the morning? It's not long ago, in 2012, we had the Staffordshire scandal, not far away in the north of England. The patients were dying because people and managers put targets in front of patients. And there was, you can Google that, there was a review, and it was one of the recommendations is that the levels of staffing should be mandatory. There should be 1 nurse for every 8 patients. That's the minimum level of staffing to be able to provide safe care. There was a recent study done by the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing. At the moment, 96% of the wards are failing to achieve this standard. 96%. I mean, barely every hospital is failing to have a safe minimum of nurses. So what does affect? What does have to do with me? If you're a patient, you will notice because mortality have increased, their waiting times also have increased. We're no longer meeting any of the targets of cancer, of A&E waiting times. And the government is playing Russian roulette with your life or your life of relative. And for 7 years, since 2012, also, my salary has been frozen. I have lost 14% of my income. That means that at the moment, I'm earning £3,000 less that I should be earning. I'm working 2 months for free to this government because my wages have not keep up with the rest of, with the inflation. When I came to England 17 years ago, one of the reasons because I chose England is because the salary was very attractive. Since Brexit, I can no longer say that because the pound has been devalued, and also I have 7 years of pay freeze. At the moment, if you look at numbers, you can earn more money in Ireland or any other country of the European Union. And that means that we no longer attract any nurses to come to this country. Not only because Brexit, but also because of the salaries. And what worries me is that a lot of us also are leaving. As I mentioned, one of my colleagues before, we have been separated in 2 groups. Europeans who've been here less than 5 years, who are young, who don't have any attachment, or who are not settled, a lot of them have left. And we've been leaving we've left with nurses like me and health workers who've been here 10, 15, 20 years, who have a good career. I mean, I have a senior position in the NHS, who feel trapped. I cannot move because I have family. If I had a conversation with my son who's 17, because I had, since Brexit, at least every week, I have 20 offers from different countries for me to go and work there. And we have been bombarded trying to take advantage of the Brexit. And all of my colleagues have taken that, but I cannot leave this country. And also, part of me saying, why I should leave? This is my home. This is the home that I worked very hard for the last 20 years. This is the home that my children will grow up. And this is a country that when I came here, that one of the main reasons, because I did love this country, I grew up admiring England. I grew up in the United Kingdom. I grew up, my child mother used to put the Beatles. I used to grow up and learn to work with the Beatles. I used to love the music, the fashion, the punks. And one of my favorite series was, the young ones, 40 Towers. I'm from Barcelona, everybody. I mean, when I had the choice of a lot of offers that I could go the rest of the world, I chose England because I wanted to be in England. But I came to England for two main reasons. Because I felt, at that point, I felt valued and I was welcome. I can no longer say that. I no longer feel welcome or valued in this country. And Brexit is partly to blame. And I'm a manager. And what worries me is also not only Europeans are leaving, also British nurses are leaving in droves. Last year, for the first time in history, never happened before, there are more nurses retiring than entering the profession. The average age of a nurse is above 40. I mean, in the next 15 years, a lot of us are going to retire. And you will think, like most Brexiteers say, I want British nurses. I love to have more British nurses. I'm the first one. But what is the government have done? Have scrapped the bursary. Now, if you want to be a nurse, you need to spend £50,000 of your money to end up working with a salary of 23,000. I'm going to finish with that. I'm also, as a manager, I'll do exit interviews when people left. And not long ago, I interviewed a British citizen who left my hospital and went to work for Aldi. And I asked her, why you have left a profession that you trained for 3 years and go to work in Aldi? And basically, she told me, if I work for Aldi, I don't need to work nights. I don't need to pay parking at my hospital. I don't do social hours, and I get 10% discount of my food. At the end of the month, I'm more or less the same salary with a lot less stress and a lot better family life. How can the NHS compete with that? And I leave it here.
Well, the first panel spoke and very forcefully to the head and to logic and rationality. I think this panel spoke to the heart and the way we all, maybe not all, but certainly the way I feel about Brexit. I think we'll follow the precedent set by Brendan. So those of you who'd like to ask questions, make comments, and then we'll ask the panel to respond collectively. So the gentleman in the mauve shirt.
Good afternoon. Anthony Frost from Team Global. Could I ask you a question about pensions, if you can answer that? What happens to pensions of UK citizens living in the EU, and indeed what happens to the pensions of EU citizens living in the UK? A lot of my European friends have expressed concern about whether they can take the pensions with them if they move, etc., etc. So that was the question. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll try and go this way across and get everybody.
Hello, my name's Mary Dejevsky. I write for The Independent and The Guardian. I've got a question and a comment. The question was about people who've been doing the interviews, because the interviewees that you quoted were all women. And yet, at least as far as the East and Central Europeans who came to work in the UK, I think the majority were young men. Is there any gender difference in attitudes and behaviour since Brexit? That's the question. Now, the comment. I understand all this great emotion about the NHS and Brexit, but I think, first of all, in terms of social care, and I have a lot of experience of social care for complicated reasons. But the idea, I think that Magella gave a rather starry-eyed view of social care as it currently exists. And I would actually argue that something which gave social care a colossal shake-up, including a rise in status, a rise in pay and professionalism, would not actually come amiss. And on the NHS more generally, I think that yes, Brexit is going to have an effect on employment in the NHS. But this is not just about Brexit. I think, as we heard in the first panel, it's a lot about the absolutely hopeless UK training and workforce planning at the centre. And I would actually say that is far, far worse and has been far more damaging than anything that Brexit is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm an EU citizen as well, but so I share the emotions. I'm afraid, I can't sleep. I'm
really have to speak up.
Like this?
Yeah.
So I'm afraid I can't sleep. I'm frightened every time I look at the news. But I also have a small company, and half of my income comes from clients in the UK, and the other half comes from the clients in the EU. I still don't know, in case of a cliff Brexit, what is going to happen to my company in 6 weeks' time. Probably, if I have to treat the EU clients in the way I now have to treat clients here from Singapore, the admin is not going to work for me. I'm going to have to close the company down. However, if I become freelance and I have settled state, I have to get a special permission from every employer, even if I only work for them for 1 hour. I'm a voiceover artist. And they have to get a special code from the Home Office for every hour that they employ me. This is another way to make me self-deport. You have no idea how horrible this settled state actually is for the people who have to take it.
The lady with the jumper. No, you put your hand up after this. Nothing European with the jumper. I have a loud voice, I think. I'm from the Netherlands. I've been here 47 years, and I've been retired for 20. Now, my experience with forms, with application forms, is difficult because my memory is trained to forget unimportant, irrelevant matters, and these application forms are always full of precisely that. The trouble is also that I work in Bolivia, where they have absolutely no, I have a big gap in my life. But I have a Dutch pension, which is based on voluntary contributions. Now, if you think that Britain is all the time in the wrong, what about the Netherlands? It has 2 conditions for getting a Dutch pension. And one is that I remain Dutch, which is now no problem because I can have dual nationality if it comes to that. Why the hell would I like it? And the other is to live in the EU. So there the bottom falls out of my argument. I applied for, first the UK pension. It is probably still payable if I would go to the Netherlands. But then the relationship between Britain and the UK, between Britain and the Netherlands, has probably changed.
I fall, as they said over the phone a year ago, I fall under several treaties, but the relationship has hardened. Look at what what the EU now talks about when they talk about Britain. So I might end up wherever I am with only one pension and not the other. And as I have a shorter work record in Britain, that is certainly a disadvantage. I wrote to the Department of Work and Pensions for the
specific question, because there are a lot of people.
it wasn't very much on the question. Another thing is the unwelcomeness. I think that white Europeans are particularly unrealistic about what they expect of a welcome. We get very quickly thrown off balance in comparison with, let's say, the Windrush. Now, the form for permanent residence, permanent from 2016 to the 29th of March, of course, not more permanent, was in the beginning, the first year and a half, exactly the same as the Windrush. And you have no idea how irrelevant these questions were and how impossible. So I think we're a bit spoiled about unwelcomeness.
Thank you. I'll come back to you, sir. We'll come back, okay? Let's go over to the cluster over there. Yeah.
My name is Zbigniew Kolidowicz. I am a theoretical physicist and hold a PhD along with 6 fellowships. I was born in the UK. My father fought for England, all the way to Berlin. He was stationed in Berlin until 48 when he came back to England, worked here. By the time he was here for 9 years, he owned 3 houses and 2 shops. Now, since I went to school, when I was 5 years old, went to junior school, and I was beaten up daily because I lived in a small village in Dorset, and I was the only, in inverted commas, foreigner. I was called a communist because obviously this was in the time of the Cold War, and I was abused nearly every day by the English people there. At the age of 16, now this is long before Brexit, at the age of 16, I'd just finished my O-levels, we were given the opportunity to go to Winthrop Down to do a computer course. A computer in those days was 2 or 3 stories of a building. I have a calculator in my pocket here, which has more computing power than that. I applied because I wanted to do science. I got a form, I filled it in, got to the last question. If your father, mother, etc. are not English, you cannot come on this course. I then did my obviously I didn't go on the course, I then did my A-levels. Having done my A-levels, I applied to university. Oh no, you can't go to this university, you can't study that subject, you can't do this, because your parents are foreign, they're not English. What was the next stage? I went to America, got into the University of California, Berkeley campus, worked there, qualified with a space science degree, then went to work for Rockwell International. I then came back to the UK after Brexit, after the referendum to join the EU. No job. Couldn't get a job anywhere. Showed my qualifications, etc. Eventually went to university again to do a master's. Couldn't do certain things, but I was very lucky. I went to Imperial. Imperial had a nuclear reactor, which I could play with. Wait a minute. The government had refused me to go on a computer course 4 years earlier at Winthrop Down, which was where the nuclear reactors were. Very strange. Anyway, let me come up to date. Yes, please do. Brexit, the vote, the referendum. I had severe cataracts in both eyes. So I went along to vote, and I had to obviously quote my name and then asked the returning officer to vote on my behalf, to put the X in the appropriate thing, because I couldn't see it. I could have had the operation before, but then I wouldn't have been able to go and vote. So I went in there. The moment I walked out of the polling station, I was told to bugger off back to Europe, etc., etc. Go home, you bloody Pole, etc. I won't mention half the things. Now, I am very distinctive. And where I live, everybody knows this. And I get abused every day. Since Brexit began. And I have complained to the police. I have complained to the Polish consulate. In the end, I said, I've had enough of this. My father was actually born in Grodno. Today, Grodno is in Belarus. But when he was born, it was in the Russian Empire. So I went to the Russian embassy. Can I have a Russian passport? Yes, thank you very much. I went to the returning officer, the polling officer, and I handed my Russian passport over, and I said, I can't vote in this country. Thank you very much. And I haven't voted since, because that's the way I feel. I'm a European. I'm not Russian. My mother was both Polish and German, so I have also a Polish passport and I have an English passport, because I was born in Croydon. And yet I am treated, you know, what is going on here?
The lady in front.
I agree with this. Is this on?
Yes, but it's not very effective.
Well, the English have to buck up. English working in America are treated like kings and queens. I know because I worked out of Hollywood. And any British star was treated like a king or a queen. Anything they wanted, they got. The British have to stop being so xenophobic. Brexit probably just underscores it, but nonetheless, even without Brexit, the British can be very high-handed. Americans over here, for instance, do not get treated like kings and queens. You get treated like you're de trop. You're a nuisance. You know, you're here. We have our own. I actually went to something last night where someone quoted plagiarized my stuff on women in film. I did the first piece on women in film for the New York Times back in 1970. And I saw some lecturer at King's, a woman, quoting from this, not even acknowledging me, but just using this stuff just for herself. I applied to King's for a job. I wasn't even interviewed. Britain has to realize, and this goes with Brits who own property overseas. Brits own property overseas, they're not treated like junk. They're treated well. Those foreigners, so to speak, or Europeans, I should say, I'm sorry, Europeans who own property in this country are now facing the premise or the possibility that they will have great problems. Britain has to realize there's no such thing as a double standard and to stop trying to play the double standard.
Peter.
Yes, Peter. But a little bit of context. I was on the phone with James O'Brien at LBC yesterday. He wanted to know what businesses would do after Brexit. My answer was very simple. I said, I'm going to Australia on the 28th of March. And he said, what, forever? I said, no, just for a couple of weeks. But in general, I'm going to export myself. And I said, I'm a knowledge worker. And my question relates to mobility and skills of all the people that have talked. So that's the question I'm coming to. I contrasted myself, yes, I'm going to be quick. I contrasted myself with my friend who drives a van and does pet taxi services, who is living on the red line and can't export himself because his petrol will go up and that'll be the end of his business. So my question really is, what do people think about the relative movement possibilities of people who have high intelligence or knowledge-based skills versus the rest of us who are, or the rest of the people perhaps doing manual jobs and other things? Will we end up with a nation of coffee houses rather than R&D centres?
There were two questions here, so the gentleman has been very patient.
My name is Peter Bill. I really will be brief. I just want to pick up on the very first question on the notebook over there about pensions. having lived for 20 years until fairly recently and then retired, having lived in Germany and therefore receiving a small German state pension, and also wondering how Brexit may affect that. You just extend the question about pensions to UK citizens receiving a European pension.
Sorry, mine's very neutral. Also, Rudy, Chair from Europeans. So there was a question about whether there's a gender distinction in responses, and I was wondering whether there's a regional distinction in response. In other words, whether EU27 citizens living in some parts of the country respond differently than others.
I cleared the floor of questions. One last one.
Dr. Benson mentioned that there is currently no equivalent status for British citizens in the EU, and countries haven't actually put anything together, for British citizens in the EU. What is likely to happen to these people, 900,000 or 1.3 million people? Because we're talking about a date that's not very far down the road, and surely something must be in place for them, otherwise they'll be in limbo.
So, can I ask first of all for panel members to respond to the questions that they felt most interested in replying to? And we'll go in reverse order.
Yeah, okay. I just want to answer the question about training. Brexit is not the sole cause of the problem we have with nurses and everything, but until now we have managed to patch the situation because we're able to attract all these Europeans, and it's not a problem just from this government conservative. I'm a great example. I came here 20 years ago, and it was a Labour government. Labour and Conservative government have failed to address the problem. Because me as a manager, I would love to have more British nurses. It's a headache trying to go to other countries to try to recruit them. Not only that, it's very expensive. If I can have a British nurse, for me, it's a lot easy, and also will work for a lot more longer than a migrant nurse. I'm saying that being a migrant myself, but also Brexit have closed a door to all these people because they no longer have UK as a #1 destination. All in Europe, these two countries that produce more nurses than not needed, that's Spain and Portugal. And UK was the #1 destination for all these nurses. Unfortunately now, UK is no longer #1, now it's shipped to Ireland. And you think of yourself, if, as I say, would you like to come to a country that you can only have a visa for 4 years, that you will have a lot of problems, that also you will need to pay a tax to be able to use the health service, that the government have doubled up just in the last few months, and also you don't know what's going to happen with your portfolio, or you prefer to go to other 27 countries that you can in and out, and basically with no papers or anything, you can apply for any job? I know my answer. If I'm on this situation 25 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have chose another country. And then I want to go to the what will happen with people who don't have movement. For me, this is one of the biggest lies that there is a may sell to the people, the freedom of movement. I'm still quite shocked when I talk to Brexiteers, they think that British freedom of movement only goes one way. I have a tax bill and I pay £53 all year to be on my tax to be a European member. That's £5 a month. With £5 a month, that pay me for my roaming charges, my health insurance, and basically the freedom of work. Just for that privilege is a lot worth it. If we come out of the European Union, we no longer have roaming charges. You will need a travel insurance. That's more expensive than your EU membership. And that means that yeah, you will be able to go to travel and you know have holidays in Spain, but they will cost you a lot more money than they cost now. And to be, that's another lie, is that Mr. May said that the EU membership is very expensive. £53 is half price that I pay for my BBC TV license. And believe me, I know which one I prefer to pay.
Okay, so I realise that lots of people I realise that lots of people in the room are probably concerned about pensions. It's very, very complicated, and I wouldn't want to give the wrong information. But what I should say is that throughout negotiations, there have been concerns about the extent to which UK state pensions will be index linked or not after Brexit. Because I don't know if you're aware that British citizens who draw British state pensions who live outside the EU, they do not have their pensions index linked. So there's a whole APPG devoted to the question of rising pensions. So I know that that's a kind of a situation, and of course anybody who leaves the UK having earned a UK state pension, which sort of like the EU system as well, will need to be aware of what happens to pensions. But I don't feel that I'm well enough equipped to actually comment on the current state in relation to that. But just to say that it's one of the things that has been focused on as these negotiations have gone on. It counts as an exportable benefit, so it goes underneath all of those bases. The two questions that I think I can speak to are the questions to do with, I think, what I would call a brain drain, a possible brain drain in light of Brexit, and obviously the question of what's going to happen to British citizens who live in the EU after Brexit, who knows. But I think what I just for some clarification, the point is that most European states are unlikely to introduce a special system of registering British citizens. It's likely to fall between, it's likely to fall into an existing system that we already have. The numbers, the ultimate numbers within each state would not make it cost effective for them to do that. So I think at the moment they are just encouraging people to take the measures that are currently available for EU citizens to demonstrate lawful residence. Now this is varied across the 27 states because they all have different systems and they all have different domestic migration policy legislation as well. So it ranges from, at the moment, there are particular issues in relation to France, who have not had, like the UK, compulsory registration of EU citizens. And so there's no centralised record of British citizens who live there that would demonstrate that they're lawfully resident. And more to the point, in the case of France, although there is an EU residence permit, it's very well documented and very well known that the French municipal authorities have often told British citizens and other EU citizens that there's absolutely no need for them to get these. At the moment, the advice is for British citizens to go and get their carte de séjour. Of course, this is also throwing up the fact that there are British citizens in France who have not lawfully exercised their right to freedom to move for various reasons because they don't meet the terms and requirements. And at the end of last year, there was a case of a woman being issued with an expulsion order and not achieving her appeal. I suspect that more of that will come to light as things go on. I think what it shows, and this kind of relates to the question about the brain drain as well, is actually freedom of movement. There are always questions about freedom of movement for who, and I think we have to remember that freedom of movement was always unevenly experienced. Not everyone had access to it in the ways that we might think of. And Brexit has kind of made visible the cracks in that. It's made visible how stratified that is as an experience. But it also exacerbates it. And I think that you're absolutely right. The question of the terms on which British people or people in the UK at the moment will be able to leave and go to other places will change. And I think that we will see a change in the demographics of those people in a particular way. Whether there'll be a brain drain, I don't know. Thank you.
Yeah, just to respond to Mary's point first about social care sector, I didn't imply, I didn't make that fact that it's rosy as it currently is. I think it is a sector that's in crisis. My point was that the current proposals around the new migration regime post-Brexit will simply exacerbate that, certainly not going to improve things. So I agree, it is a sector currently in crisis. On the gender point, I mean, I'm not currently interviewing EU citizens about Brexit, but I did do a big project with Polish men during the recession in 2008 and 2009. And they weren't only young, some of them were in their 40s and 50s, but some of them were in their 20s. And what was interesting was a very similar discourse at that time. You know, we talked about Brexit, people would just leave. It was the same then, or the Poles will just go back because the circumstances had changed. This Lottie was doing well relative to the pound. There was increased racism against Polish anti-immigrant sentiment. But interestingly, and I was interviewing people who were still here, okay, I admit that, but they spoke about the reasons why they wouldn't leave. And those were often about family. So, as Louise was saying earlier, with time, people develop connections. People had met new partners, had developed relationships, and they wanted to stay. Men spoke about having children. The men do have children. And they talked about them being in school and them wanting to see their children through school, not wanting to disrupt them. And they also have professional relationships. So a lot of these men were self-employed, working in construction, maybe both were self-employed. That was quite common at the time. And they talked about how difficult it would be to go back to Poland because their connections were here, their knowledge about how their industry worked, how their business worked, was located here in the UK. And that brings me to the point of mobility and this idea of this question of a brain drain. We can very much have a discourse which individualizes people, that presents a narrative about a very rational, economic people who will simply respond to changing circumstances and be able to up sticks and go. But the reality is, for many people, other priorities take precedence. Children, families, ties, connections, attachments to places, different senses of belonging. So I'm quite kind of careful when we talk about mobility to always acknowledge the fact that people are not individuals. They're individuals in relation, and they make their decisions around movement in relation to other people, other things going on in their lives. And finally, to the question, I think was getting at issues around whiteness and Europeanness from our Polish, Russian, British member of the audience. As part of the Sustainable Care project we're doing at Sheffield with partners elsewhere, Louise and I have been interviewing people who came to the UK in the past from countries like Poland, Ireland, and African Caribbean countries who are now aging themselves. So they're of pensionable age, they're encountering the care system, they're developing care needs. And what's very obvious from that is that being white, when we look historically at their experience of coming to Britain, being white was no guarantee of privilege. So when we talk to the Irish and their experiences, I was astonished to learn that in the church, the Catholic chapel in Sheffield, when the Irish first came, they were segregated. They weren't allowed to sit with the English Catholics. And we hear stories, I mean, that it wasn't a myth, but it was a reality. No blacks, no Irish, no dogs. But actually people we're interviewing talk about seeing those signs and how it made them feel as young, these were young men who talked about that kind of issue. They're now in their 70s and their 80s, and how that made them feel. So I think that historical context is really important. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there has been generations of people who've experienced racism in the UK who've also been white.
Okay, I won't reiterate everything that Magella has said, but I also wanted to pick up on the gender question that Mary asked. So, yes, initially after 2004,
the statistics do show that the majority of Polish people who were coming here were men. But then it began to change, and we do get more of a balancing out of male and female. So in my research, I did interview both men and women. And I was just looking through my notes, and I actually have a quote from two men, one French and one Polish, which are just so similar and so emotional as well. So of course, as Magella said, men have children too, men also have emotions too. And so their reactions were also very emotional in relation to Brexit. So sorry if I gave the wrong impression when I read our quotes earlier. I didn't realise I'd only read quotes from women. So I'll just very quickly rebalance that to stick in a few male quotes as well. So Damien, who's a French participant, he said, I still remember when I heard the result. I felt like I was living in a different world. I had this feeling of being unwelcome. I was in a foreign land where I was treated as an alien with second-class rights. So a very strong reaction there from a man. And similarly from Mateusz, a Polish man. And he said when he heard the Brexit result, he also uses this phrase, I felt I was living in a different country as compared to the one I had settled in. And I think what's really interesting, and this comes to your point about the regional dimension, because the participants I interviewed all lived in London. And I think one of the things that I noticed in my earlier research was that they were saying, but London isn't England. London is like its own world. London is so cosmopolitan, London is so multicultural. And I do feel that one of the shocking aspects of Brexit was that they were very much cocooned and insulated in London about the way the rest of the country was feeling about the Brexit referendum. So the result came as a shock. So for example, in Lambeth, where I live, 79% voted Remain. So if you live in a part of London where everybody you know is going to vote Remain or has voted Remain, to then think that the rest of the country didn't feel like that was a big shock for people. But I think what's interesting for these migrants, the French and the Polish, was that they were living in London. They didn't feel they were living in Britain, but actually they were living in Britain. And that's why the Brexit result came to as such a shock to them, that London was not its own little world. Actually, it's part of a nation state. It's not an independent kingdom, as it sometimes feels like, or queendom. So in terms of gender and the regional dimension, I think there was some interconnection there that I just wanted to highlight.
Well, can I once again, on your behalf, thank all the panellists and indeed all the people who spoke from the floor so movingly. It brings to my mind one of Neil Kinnock's better remembered speeches about do not grow old, do not fall ill. He was talking about Thatcher's Britain. A distant memory, perhaps, for some of us, but it may also be true, I fear, after Brexit. To cheer us up somewhat, refreshments. Thank you.
Because if I most award okay.